They screamed that it was impossible to block a magic smash with just physical strength, but I just stopped their strongest attack with my bare forearm. You see, in my past life, I was a crippled genius who revolutionized martial arts from a wheelchair, unable to throw a single punch. Now I've been reborn in a world ruled by arrogant mages who think commoners like me are nothing but dirt. They tried to crush me with gravity, monsters, and even assassins, but all they did was wake up the demon sleeping inside me. Here is how I took on the entire nobility and became the strongest student at the legendary Candria Arcanist Academy. So, picture this. It's the year 504 of the Saint calendar, and I'm standing at the legendary Candria Arcanist Academy. And when I say legendary, I mean this place is absolutely massive. It looks less like a school for magic and more like a sprawling fortress built for the ultra elite. And there I am, standing right in front of the gate, completely floored by the scale of it all. I might just be a kid, but you could probably see the big dreams written all over my face. This was it. Yep, that's me. Louis Carril, age 13, and let me tell you, I was definitely feeling the pressure. I took one look at the sheer number of other applicants and realized that getting into the Empire's top school was not going to be a walk in the park. Suddenly, a voice cuts through my thoughts, calling out my name. For just a second, my intense focus breaks and I turn around. It's my parents, Julian and Laciella, running toward me like their lives depend on it. These two are definitely the supportive type, though they were completely out of breath from the sprint. My mom, Laciella, immediately went into full worried parent mode, fussing over me. She started checking if I had my ID and making sure my hair dye was holding up so I wouldn't stand out too much. Mom looked genuinely terrified. She told me that examinees have actually died during these tests before. She was worried that if someone targeted me because of my unique hair and eye color, things could get ugly fast. Julian stepped in to calm her down, placing a hand on her shoulder while I watched them. He insisted that learning magic was the only way to solve the problem I have, whatever that might be. My dad pointed out that in the entire Northern Empire, this academy is the only place where commoners like us even stand a chance at the exam. It was a rare opportunity, and we couldn't afford to let it slide. The academy just towers over the city, a symbol of power and prestige that's usually reserved for the nobility. It was a beautiful sight, but it really highlighted the divide between me and the world I was trying to enter. I knew the stories. Candria Arcanist Academy was established by the royal family and is considered one of the 10 great academies. It's basically the Ivy League of magic, but with way more dangerous entrance exams. And this was just the beginning for me. I'd seen illustrations of the powerful masters who teach here, showing off some insane magical displays. That was the level I was aiming for, the absolute peak of magical combat and theory. The history of the school is legendary, known for producing the Empire's strongest Grand Masters. I remember seeing this one art piece, showing a warrior wreathed in flames as he took on a whole crowd of enemies. It was epic. In the last 10 years, something unprecedented had happened. Several guardians from non-noble backgrounds had actually emerged from here. It was the ultimate rags to riches story, and it's why I was so determined. Sometimes I just picture it, a silhouette of a powerful mage, a reminder of the absolute peak of power that awaits those who can survive the training. Most graduates from here end up becoming the legends of the next generation. I had to be one of them. Dad adjusted his glasses with a confident smirk, and I could tell he was proud of my potential. He was convinced that this was the perfect environment for me to truly unlock my latent magical abilities. I was all in. I declared right then and there that I had to become a Grand Master no matter what. I wasn't just doing it for glory, though. There was a deeper motivation behind that determined look. I felt this scary, intense look come over my face as I vowed to get stronger and take back ownership of the orphanage from the church. I wasn't playing around. I had a mission, and zero chill. My mom was taken aback by the sudden intensity coming off of me. She could tell that I was carrying a burden far heavier than most 13-year-olds ever have to deal with. Julian tried to reassure her, telling her she was doing more than enough for all the children we care for. He called her a dependable mother, but I could see the worry was still lingering in her eyes. I gave my mom a soft smile and told her that I was only alive because of her. It was a sweet moment, but there was a hint of a past life mystery in those words. Little did she know how true they were, but fate had other plans for me. And then, the memories hit me. A flashback. Me in a past life, lying in a hospital bed hooked up to a respirator. Turns out, I was a genius who dreamed of being the world's greatest fighter, but my body couldn't even breathe on its own. Despite my physical limitations, my passion for martial arts never died. I spent my days in a wheelchair, grinding away at a computer and researching martial arts theory until I became a top-tier scholar. My research actually revolutionized the modern martial arts industry and helped revive the entire field. I was a legend in the academic world even if I couldn't throw a single punch. But the fame and glory meant nothing in the end. I was just a sick person whose body was failing him, no matter how much knowledge I crammed into my head. I remembered how my own parents in that life eventually abandoned me because I was such a drain on their resources. Talk about a tragic backstory. I died feeling like a total burden. I can still see the moment they left me, and the pain in my heart was definitely worse than the illness. I just wanted a healthy body and a life I could call my own. As the heart monitor flatlined, my final wish was simple. I just wanted a healthy body and a family that loved me. It was the ultimate isekai setup, and man, it still hits hard. And just like that, I was reborn in the northern Candria Empire, in the town of Mantia. The sun was shining, and the town looked peaceful, a far cry from the sterile hospital room I died in. Laciella was the one who found me. I remember people warning her that my unusual hair and eyes might bring disaster, but she didn't care about any of that. She just saw a child who needed a home. As an infant, I was having a minor existential crisis, wondering why I wasn't dead. I was confused as hell, but hey, at least I wasn't hooked up to a machine anymore. And that's when everything changed for me. I remember Laciella hugging me tight, telling everyone that this child is innocent and she couldn't just leave me behind. She was officially the MVP of my story for giving me a second chance. She looked down at me with such warmth that it actually shocked me. This was the precious family I wished for, and I was finally getting to experience it. She gave me my new name, Louis Kirill. From that day forward, my life as a scholar was over, and my journey to become a magic master began. Fast forward to the present, and here I was, living my best life with a family that loves me and a body that actually works. I was genuinely happy, but that peace was about to be interrupted. Suddenly, a random noble jerk shoves my mom aside, calling her a filthy commoner. Here we go, the classic arrogant noble trope appearing right on schedule. Mom hit the ground hard, and I rushed to catch her. I was absolutely livid. You do not mess with my mom if you want to keep your teeth. Dad was just as shocked, but the noble didn't care, laughing about how a commoner thinks they can become a grand master. This guy was literally begging for a beatdown. I gave the noble a look that could kill, my eyes narrowing with pure, unfiltered rage. I was ready to throw hands right then and there, exam be damned. The noble jerk kept taunting us, acting like his luck was going to run out just by being mere a filthy commoner. His friends were in the back laughing along, making the whole scene even more infuriating. I was literally shaking with anger, my fists clenched as I prepared to lunge. I whispered about what bastards they were, and I knew things were about to get physical. But before I could do anything, Dad grabbed my hand, stopping me. He knew that getting into a fight with a noble before the exam starts was a one-way ticket to disqualification. But things were about to get worse for my patience. Dad told me to focus on the exam instead of letting these punks get to me. It was the smart move, but I could tell it was killing him to let this slide, just like it was killing me. Mom stepped in too, reminding me that I promised not to cause trouble at school. She was worried I'd lose my chance at a better future just because of some arrogant jerks. I took a deep breath and forced myself to back down, though I was still glaring daggers at the noble. I was bearing with it for now, but that grudge was definitely staying on my list. I apologized to my mom, my expression softening as Dad placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. We were a team, and we had to stick together to survive this place. The noble walked off, calling us a buzzkill and acting like he won the encounter. Little did he know, he just made an enemy of a guy with the soul of a martial arts grandmaster. Suddenly, the crowd started parting as people began shouting for everyone to make way. A major player was arriving, and the atmosphere changed instantly. Lord Kain enters the scene. The crowd was buzzing because one of the most famous noble heirs had just shown up. Even the arrogant noble from before looked intimidated by this guy's presence. Kain Oranka, heir of the Oranka family. He looked exactly like a noble should, composed, well-dressed, and incredibly handsome. I could tell right away he was going to be a major rival. I watched him pass, my face shrouded in shadow. I knew that guys like Kain were the real competition, the ones I'd have to surpass to reach the top. I turned back to my parents one last time, giving them a confident thumbs up. I was determined to pass and make them proud, no matter how many arrogant nobles stood in my way. As I walked away, I saw Kain Oranka glance back at me for a split second. It seemed the top-tier noble had already sensed that there was something different about this commoner kid. I declared to myself that I'd learn magic, and show everyone exactly what I was capable of. The nobles behind me were still snickering, but I knew they wouldn't be laughing for long. I wasn't just aiming to pass. I was aiming to be the strongest in this life. I wanted to protect the people precious to me, and I knew that only absolute power could do that. And this decision, right here, would change everything. I felt the determination surge through me. I gripped my ID card, my eyes probably glowing with an intense light. I was ready to charge ahead without caring what anyone else thought. My parents, Julian and Laciella, watched me go, looking incredibly anxious. They knew the odds were insane. Only 20 to 30 people would pass out of 20,000 applicants. I heard Dad note that I'm more stubborn than anyone he's ever met. He was right. Once I decide to do something, there's no stopping me, and as my family, all they could do was support me. I sprinted toward the exam hall, leaving everyone else in the dust. I wasn't waiting around for the test to come to me, I was taking it head on. I entered the massive exam hall and noticed that almost everyone there was significantly older than me. I was a 13-year-old kid in a room full of adults and seasoned fighters. The scale of the entrance examination was revealed, with thousands of applicants gathered in the massive courtyard. The 504th Candria Arcanist Academy exam was officially about to begin. The principal of the academy, Arcanist Smith, appeared on the balcony above the crowd. He was the supervisor for the exam and looked every bit as powerful as you'd expect a headmaster to be. I looked around at the competition, noticing the various types of fighters and mages in the crowd. There were martial arcanists and practitioners of martial arcane arts from all over the world. I remembered the breakdown of the 6 ranks in this world: apprentice, fighter, master, grandmaster, sage, and saint. My goal, the grandmaster rank, was right near the top of the pyramid. I knew grandmaster was the 3rd highest rank, a class of people with immense privilege and power. It was a mountain that very few ever managed to climb. The principal's words carried weight as he explained the reality of the world we were entering. To be a part of the privileged class, you have to prove your worth in the most brutal way possible. He explained the first test. We had to climb the stairs while being guarded, or rather hindered, by our seniors. It sounded simple, but I knew there was a catch. The seniors were already in position, looking down at us applicants with arrogant smiles. These guys weren't just going to let us pass. They were here to weed out the weak. Little did they know what was coming next for them. There were a total of 1,000 stairs, and only those who could make it to the top could move on to the next test. It was a literal uphill battle from the very start. Principal Smith gave us one final warning. Once the hourglass ran out, the exam was over. He had this intense, serious look that told everyone this wasn't a game. With a shout to begin, the signal was given, and the massive crowd immediately started surging forward. The energy in the air was electric as thousands of people charged toward the first step. Applicants were already yelling and pushing, trying to get a head start. Some were shouting about how they'd be first and how this exam was a piece of cake. They had no idea what was coming. A senior at the top of the stairs let out a sinister, shadowed grin. He had that "I'm about to ruin your whole career" vibe going on, and it was genuinely creepy. He welcomed us to hell. Suddenly, a massive red aura erupted from him, washing over the entire area like a tidal wave of pure malice. It was an intimidation tactic on a whole different level. The red energy swirled violently, creating a terrifying pressure that crushed the applicant's spirits. This is what it means to face someone from a higher rank. The students around me were absolutely losing it, screaming in terror as the killing intent hit them. Some of them looked like they were literally choking on the air itself. People were dropping like flies, collapsing onto the stairs as they were disqualified. The sheer pressure was too much for anyone without a strong enough will or aura. The crowd recognized the guy at the top. It was Lord Sheath, the finance minister's son and last year's top scorer. He was already a beast, and he was using every bit of his power to intimidate us commoners. Sheath smirked, noting that what he just released wasn't even an attack, it was just killing intent. He was literally just flexing his aura, and it was already wiping out half the field. The other applicants were stunned, realizing that a senior was already this far ahead of them. They were paralyzed by fear, unable to even take another step forward. I was the only one standing calmly in the middle of the chaos, watching as people passed out around me. I looked at Sheath with a cold, unimpressed expression, and this was just the beginning for him. I started walking forward, my boots clicking on the stone as I moved through the red aura without breaking a sweat. Everyone else was struggling to breathe, and I was just taking a stroll. My eyes were glowing with a faint blue light as I stared down Sheath. I probably had this. Is that all you got? Look, that was absolutely legendary. The senior watched me from above, clearly surprised that a kid could withstand his killing intent. Most of the other examinees were lying in piles on the ground, completely out for the count. Sheath commented that I seemed to have some backbone, but then immediately followed it up with more noble nonsense. He laughed, saying there was no room for commoners at this academy. He kept running his mouth, acting like he was the ultimate gatekeeper. He was convinced that I was just a fluke, and that I'd eventually buckle under the pressure. I didn't say a word. I just kept that intense, focused gaze on him. I was analyzing his aura, looking for an opening. Sheath's eye twitched. He was clearly annoyed that he couldn't break my spirit. He decided to turn up the heat, his own eye glowing with a dangerous red light. Yelling that he'd make me kneel, Sheath unleashed a massive pillar of red energy, trying to crush me once and for all. It was a total overkill move, but the guy was clearly feeling insecure. The pressure was so intense that more students were literally getting flattened against the stairs. It was a brutal display of power that showed just how wide the gap was between them and a real fighter. I stood right in the middle of the storm, my hair blowing in the wind, but my body not moving an inch. I was completely unfazed, which had to be terrifying for Sheath to witness. I finally spoke, mocking him. Is that all your killing intent amounts to? I told him it was enough to scare ordinary people, but for me, well, it was basically nothing. A quick memory flashed in my mind, a dark, misty forest where a younger me was standing over a defeated enemy. I've seen a real battle. Sheath's parlor tricks didn't even compare. I suddenly leaped into action, a blue aura flaring around me. I wasn't just defending anymore, I was taking the fight to him. My eye glowed with an intense blue flame as I narrowed my sights on Sheath. I was moving so fast that most people couldn't even follow my movements. What happened next was hard for them to believe. The senior tried to react, his own red aura flaring up as he prepared to defend. He was finally starting to take me seriously, but it might have already been too late. I gave him a wicked smirk, telling him that his tricks wouldn't work. I had the experience of a lifetime in this young body, and I was about to put it to good use. I launched myself off the ground with so much force that the stone literally shattered under my feet. I was like a rocket heading straight for the top of the stairs. I punched straight through Sheath's red aura, the blue energy around me tearing a hole in his defense. It must have been an incredible sight, showing the sheer power of my will. I wound up a massive punch, my entire body rotating into the strike. This wasn't just a regular punch. This was a martial arts grandmaster's technique delivered with everything I had. I told Sheath I was about to show him what real killing intent is. My aura exploded, a beam of light shooting from my eye as I prepared to land the finishing blow. The impact was absolutely insane. A massive explosion of white and blue energy lit up the entire courtyard. You could almost feel the shockwave just looking at it. The other examinees were completely speechless, their mouths hanging open in shock. They just saw a 13-year-old kid launch a counterattack that leveled a top-tier senior. Sheath's face was completely contorted as the punch connected, his arrogant smirk replaced by pure pain and disbelief. He was getting absolutely rocked. My fist connected perfectly with his jaw, sending a ripple through the air. For anyone who was tired of this guy's noble attitude, this had to be the definition of satisfying. Sheath was sent flying backward, his body crashing through the air as I stood there like an absolute boss. The crowd whispered, unable to believe what they just saw from someone who was only 13 or 14. I landed coolly, my expression going back to that calm, cold focus. I was already done with this guy and ready to move on to the next challenge. Another senior with brown hair watched me walk away, looking absolutely terrified. He must have realized that this commoner was on a whole different level than anyone else in this exam. But fate had other plans for him. The crowd chatter continued as they realized I did all of that without even using magic. A pure physical strike that overwhelmed a magical aura. They were calling me a monster. I kept walking, not even looking back at the senior I just leveled. I was going through no matter what, and I was already focused on the top of the stairs. I saw the ranking board, a massive display where the names of the examinees were being recorded. This is where history is made, and I knew my name was about to be at the very top. I saw someone's hand reach out to grab one of the cards on the desk. The stakes were getting higher, and it looked like another confrontation was brewing. The brown-haired senior from before was suddenly enraged, screaming in frustration as he prepared to attack me. He clearly couldn't stand seeing a commoner show them up like that. He launched a massive smash attack, a red energy-infused strike that was meant to crush me into the ground. It was a cheap shot from behind, and it looked incredibly dangerous. I sensed the attack coming and prepared to counter, my body already twisting into a defensive stance. My reaction time is basically God tier. With a massive boom, I blocked the glowing red smash with just my forearm, the impact creating another massive shockwave. I didn't even use magic to stop it. The senior was absolutely losing his mind, screaming about how I blocked his smash without magic. He couldn't wrap his head around how someone could be this strong physically. But then, Principal Smith stepped in, placing a hand on the senior's shoulder. He had this calm but terrifyingly powerful aura that immediately stopped the fight. Smith told them that Candria Arcanist Academy treats all examinees equally, whether they're a noble or a commoner. He reminded them that before monsters, all humans are the same. The senior finally backed down, bowing his head while I gave a respectful thank you to the principal. It was a class act from both of them, and it showed why Smith was in charge. The principal looked down at me with a faint smile and congratulated me. I, Lewis Kirill, had officially passed the first test, and I did it in the most legendary way possible, but we were just getting started. After the first test, Principal Smith pulled me aside. His eyes were fixed on my unique hair, and eyes as he whispered that my appearance was quite concerning. I knew he sensed something out of the ordinary about this commoner kid. I kept my head down, my face hidden in shadow as I listened to the man in charge. I knew my traits were a dead giveaway, but I wasn't expecting the principal himself to notice so quickly. I looked up with a sharp, questioning gaze and asked what exactly he meant by that. I wasn't intimidated, just curious why the most powerful man in the academy was taking a personal interest in me. To my surprise, the principal gave me a friendly pat on the head, treating me like any other kid. It was a jarring moment of kindness in a place that's supposed to be ruthless. Smith got serious again, leaning in to offer a solution. He said that if I was admitted, he'd prepare a special magic potion to hide my unique traits. He was clearly looking out for me, but I had to wonder what his real motive was. I watched him walk away, my mind already shifting gears back to the exam. I didn't know what the principal was planning, but first I needed to pass. I checked my own pulse and prepared for the second test. The principal headed back toward the main building, leaving me standing alone in the massive courtyard. The first hurdle was over, but the atmosphere was already getting thicker with tension. Lord Sheath, the brown-haired noble I punched earlier, was staring daggers at me from across the square. I could tell he couldn't believe his eyes. It was the first time anyone had ever seen the principal intervene during an exam like that. Sheath was absolutely fuming, his face contorted with rage as he watched me. He growled, wondering why Smith would protect a mere commoner of all people. His pride had taken a massive hit after being humiliated in public. The scene shifted to the massive second training ground, a sprawling arena that looked like a high-stakes gladiator stadium. A voice over the intercom announced that the second exam was about to begin. Out of the original 20,000 applicants, only 1,000 of us were left standing after the first test. Most of them were nobles who've received elite training since they could walk, leaving almost no room for commoners. But things were about to get worse for me. Sheath and his lackeys wasted no time and headed straight for me again, clearly looking for a rematch. They hadn't learned their lesson yet, and it looked like they were ready to start trouble before the test even began. Sheath leaned in close with a sinister smirk, whispering that no one was going to help me next time. He was convinced that I only survived the first round because of a lucky intervention from the principal. He yelled, calling me a filthy commoner and losing his cool completely. He was trying to intimidate me in front of everyone, but he was just making a scene. I didn't even flinch, just staring back with a deadpan expression that said I'd heard it all before. I've been through far worse in my past life than a temper tantrum from a privileged teenager. Sheath's friends backed him up, laughing and acting like big shots. One of them snidely remarked that if the principal hadn't helped, I would have been disqualified ages ago. I finally broke my silence with a mocking smile. I calmly said that seriously, Sheath was a complete idiot. Calling a noble an idiot in public? Yeah, I'm an absolute savage. The insult hit Sheath like a physical blow, leaving him momentarily stunned. He wasn't expecting the trash he'd been insulting to talk back with such confidence. I added that the Grand Master has better judgment than them, my eyes glowing with an intense, intimidating light. I was basically telling them they were too stupid to see why the principal took an interest in me. Sheath snapped, clenching his fist as red energy flared around him. He screamed, asking if I wanted to be knocked out right now, completely ignoring the exam rules in his blind rage. I just gave him a cool, unimpressed smirk. I was literally begging the guy to try something, knowing full well I could end this fight in a single move. Sheath's eye was literally bulging with rage as he prepared to strike. He'd lost all control, and in a place like this, that's the first step toward a very painful defeat. Roaring that he'll do just that, Sheath threw a high-powered punch wrapped in destructive aura. He was going for a one-hit kill, but he was moving way too predictably, and that's when everything changed for him. My eye narrowed, my focus becoming razor-sharp as I tracked his incoming fist. I've seen a million punches like this in my research. For a martial arts expert, this is amateur hour. Sheath's fist whistled through the air, aimed right at my head. He was putting everything into this strike, but he was about to find out what happens when you fight a master of technique. I didn't dodge, I countered. Using just 2 fingers, I struck him in a vital pressure point, neutralizing the entire force of his punch instantly. Sheath froze in place, his eyes wide with horror as he realized his body wouldn't move an inch. He was panicking, thinking his body wouldn't move, paralyzed by my perfect counterstrike. I delivered the finishing touch, my fingers glowing with focused energy. Meridian Severance, Spiral Point Strike. This wasn't magic, it was pure, refined martial arts that disrupts the flow of aura. The impact was silent but devastating, a massive shockwave erupting from the point of contact. Sheath was caught in the blast, his pride and his body both taking a massive hit. Sheath was sent spinning through the air like a rag doll, completely unable to stop his momentum. He was getting a very public lesson in humility, and it looked like it hurt. His 2 lackeys were screaming in shock as they watched their leader get launched across the arena. They shouted for their bro, their arrogant smiles having vanished in a split second. Sheath skidded along the stone floor on his back, leaving a trail of dust behind him. It was an embarrassing sight for a noble who was just bragging about his power a minute ago. The 2 friends rushed over to help him up, their faces pale with fear. They were starting to realize that the commoner they were bullying was actually a complete monster. Sheath groaned in agony, clutching his arm as he tried to stand up. He was in a world of pain, and his body still wasn't responding the way it should. He stared at his trembling hand, his face pale as a ghost. He gasped that he couldn't even move it properly, noticing a strange purple aura lingering around the area I struck. He looked up at me, his face sweating from the pain and fear. He screamed that I used poison, unable to accept that he was defeated by pure skill, but fate had other plans for him. I stood over him, looking down with cold indifference. I told him it wasn't poison, it was martial arts. Maybe he should have spent less time talking and more time training. I looked at the stunned crowd, my presence filling the arena. I admitted I was holding back like my mom told me to, but even I have my limits when it comes to dealing with idiots. I clenched my fist, my gaze becoming even more intense. I declared that the only people who can hit others are those who are prepared to be hit themselves. Talk about a mic drop moment. Suddenly, someone grabbed my wrist from behind, stopping me in my tracks. The grip was firm and professional, catching even me by surprise. It was Lord Kain Oranka. The top noble prodigy had stepped in to stop the fight. He said calmly that we're in the middle of an exam, his eyes locked onto mine. Kain looked me dead in the eye, his expression unreadable. He asked if I was fine with being disqualified. He wasn't defending Sheath, he was actually warning me not to throw my future away. I looked down at my grabbed wrist, clearly annoyed by the interruption. I don't like being told what to do, especially by another high and mighty noble. Sheath was still trying to lunge forward, but one of his friends was literally holding him back. He was yelling at Kain to stay out of this while Kain stood between us like an unbreakable wall. Kain turned his gaze toward the noble group, his blue eyes flashing with authority. He asked if they knew who he was, his voice low and dangerous. Kain firmly told them that they're the ones who should back off. Even the arrogant Sheath went quiet when the heir of the Oranka family spoke. This guy has some serious presence. The noble gang looked frustrated, but they knew they couldn't win a fight against Kain. Sheath tried to say something, but his friend pulled him away, telling him to just forget it for now. They finally walked away, defeated and humiliated. The tension in the arena dropped for a second, but I knew this wasn't the last we've seen of those guys. Sheath looked back one last time, his face a mask of pure hatred. He muttered that commoners and nobles are all trash, and told them to remember this. This dude is seriously going to be a problem later, and this is just the beginning for him. I watched Kain walk away, my expression going back to being unimpressed. I thought all nobles were the same, using their status to do whatever they want. I was clearly not a fan of his heroic act. Kain headed toward the other applicants, and a girl immediately started flirting with him. She asked if he's strong and courageous, but Kain just kept walking, staying focused on the exam. A group of girls was already fangirling over him, blushing and whispering as he passed. Kain was the ultimate golden boy of this academy, and he hadn't even started his first year yet. Applicants were literally swarming Kain, begging him to team up for the next test. People from the Node family, the Shea family, everyone wanted a piece of the Oranka heir's talent. Two guys in the crowd were talking about how Kain is only 13 and already this amazing. They were convinced that teaming up with him was a guaranteed ticket to passing the exam. I just let out a huff, looking away in disgust. I wasn't interested in popularity contests or making noble friends. I was here to prove I was the strongest on my own terms. Suddenly, a massive blue vortex of energy erupted on the center stage. The power coming off it was incredible, drawing everyone's attention as the second test officially began. Principal Smith appeared on the stage, looking calm and imposing. He announced that next was finally the power test, his voice echoing through the entire stadium. Glowing yellow circles appeared on the floor beneath our feet. People shouted in confusion, looking down as the magic started to take effect. Kain noticed a glowing earth attribute mark appearing on his chest. It was a high-level detection spell, and everyone in the arena was suddenly part of a massive magical network. Everyone was suddenly slammed toward the ground as the gravity on the stage increased tenfold. One girl gasped that her body suddenly got heavy, her legs buckling under the sudden pressure. A giant glowing magic circle spread across the entire floor, pulsing with raw power. This was some seriously high-level earth magic, meant to crush anyone who wasn't physically and mentally tough. Little did they know what was coming next for them. Principal Smith stood perfectly still in the middle of the lightning-like energy. He explained that while under the influence of earth magic, we'd fight on this stage. This test was basically survival of the fittest on steroids. Even the arrogant nobles like Sheath were struggling, their faces red as they tried to keep from collapsing. They groaned that this was a Grand Master's earth magic and it was unbelievable. Their elite training was barely keeping them upright. Suddenly, someone in the crowd shouted for everyone to look, that some guy was walking around like it's nothing. Everyone looked over, and their jaws dropped in pure disbelief. Kain was standing, but even he was sweating and struggling under the massive weight of the spell. I could see he was shocked that anyone could be handling this better than him. Kain whispered to himself as his eyes widened, looking toward the center of the stage. He'd recognized my silver hair. I was stealing the show again. My boots landed solidly on the stone, the impact cracking the floor slightly. I was moving with incredible speed and power despite the increased gravity. It was me, Louis. I had already made it onto the main stage while everyone else was still crawling. People screamed, unable to believe what they were seeing as someone had already gotten on the stage. Principal Smith looked at me with a knowing smirk. He said that I was first again. He was clearly enjoying seeing me defy everyone's expectations. The examinees realized that I was the one who passed the first test first. I was already becoming a legend in this exam, and the other nobles were starting to feel very, very insecure. I stood tall amidst the glowing magic lines, my presence making the air itself feel heavy. People whispered in awe and fear, wondering about that guy again. Kain was panting, thinking to himself that even with 3 years of master-level training, he could barely stand. He looked at me and must have realized the gap between us might be bigger than he thought. The principal's voice boomed across the arena. He declared that only examinees currently standing could participate in the next test. Half the applicants were already out of the running. Smith snapped his fingers, and blue magical energy started swirling in front of him. He was about to introduce the next part of the test, and I knew it wasn't going to be easy. What happened next was hard for them to believe. A magic circle manifested right next to me, glowing with a brilliant blue light. It was like the academy was literally presenting me with the tools I needed to succeed. A rack of glowing weapons, swords, axes, and staves appeared out of thin air. Smith said that those who want weapons could choose from over there, giving everyone a chance to arm themselves. A group of spinning swords flew into the air, their blades catching the light as they floated above the stage. It was a beautiful display of magic, but its purpose was pure combat. My hand reached out and grabbed a simple wooden training sword with incredible precision. No hesitation, no choosing, just a warrior picking up a weapon and getting ready. I stood there holding 2 swords, probably looking like a seasoned veteran ready for war. I didn't need a fancy staff or a heavy axe, I just needed something to cut with. The other examinees were struggling to even pick up their weapons under the crushing gravity. They were huffing and panting, while I looked like I was just out for a morning stroll. Principal Smith looked out over the remaining applicants with a stern expression. He told us we were ready and to begin the exam. And with that, the real chaos started. Smith snapped his fingers again, his eyes glowing with power. He commanded them to release the bound slimes. Wait, slimes? This was starting to feel like an RPG tutorial. A series of dark holes opened in the ceiling of the arena, looking like a swarm of angry eyes staring down at us. Something was about to drop, and it wasn't rain. The examinees looked up in confusion, holding their weapons tight. One guy asked what bound slimes are, while I just kept my eyes locked on the ceiling, my instincts screaming. I shouted a warning, my sharp eye tracking a sudden movement. I was the first one to realize the danger was coming from directly overhead. Hundreds of blue, glowing blobs started falling from the ceiling like a meteor shower. Someone shouted that something's falling, but it was already way too late to just stand there. A slime splatted right onto an examinee who was too slow to react. The blue liquid covered him instantly, and I could tell these things were way more dangerous than they looked. One of the slimes landed right in front of me, a cute, squishy blue blob with big, vacant eyes. I thought to myself that these must be bound slimes, not letting my guard down for a second. The slime started bouncing everywhere. The rules were simple. Block an attack for 1 point, dodge for 2, and defeat one for 5. It was a literal point grind in the middle of a gravity field, but this decision would change everything for me. Principal Smith watched from the balcony, his face a mask of cold professionalism. He reminded us that only the top 100 advanced to the 3rd test. The pressure was officially through the roof. I looked around at the chaos, my eyes narrowing. I muttered to myself that only 100 people will pass. I knew I had to play this perfectly to ensure my spot in the next round. One of the slimes let out a soft sound as it bounced off the floor. It looked harmless, but in an academy this prestigious, even a slime can be a nightmare if you underestimate it. 2 nobles were watching the slimes bounce around with arrogant smirks. One said they looked pretty dumb, and the other agreed, thinking slimes are low-level monsters and should be easy to beat. Famous last words. One of the guys charged forward with his sword raised. He yelled that this will be an easy 5 points, already tasting victory. He thought he was about to get an easy kill, but he was in for a rude awakening. He swung his massive sword at a falling slime, shouting for it to take this. He was putting all his strength into the strike, but the slime was moving in a way he didn't expect. The slime easily dodged the blade mid-air, its body morphing and twisting with incredible agility. These weren't your typical slow-moving slimes. They were fast and they were smart. Before the noble could even blink, the slime counterattacked. It flew straight at his face like a blue missile, and there was no way he could block it in time. The guy's face was a mask of pure panic as the slime closed in. He realized too late that he was the one being hunted, not the other way around. The slime hit him square in the face with a loud smack. It was a brutal impact that probably just broke his nose and his spirit at the same time. The noble fell backward as the slime bounced off him with a cheerful sound. Someone else yelled in shock, seeing one of their own getting taken out by a weak monster. More slimes were falling like rain, slamming into the ground with massive thuds. The arena was becoming a complete war zone of squishy, blue destruction. Someone pointed up, yelling to watch out, that they keep falling. The examinees were scrambling to dodge, their previous confidence having completely evaporated. And that's when everything changed for them. Chaos reigned as more applicants got hit by the water-like impacts of the slimes. Someone screamed in frustration as they were flattened against the floor, their exam ending right there. Slimes were bouncing all over the arena, hitting examinees left and right with high-speed strikes. It was like being in a giant pinball machine, and everyone was the target. Proctors were standing on the balcony, calmly recording the points. They called out scores for various numbers, treating this like a simple tally while people were fighting for their lives down here. A proctor mentioned to the principal that this year's exam includes the young masters from legendary families like the Oranka and Durahan houses. The stakes were clearly higher than usual. Kain Oranka was moving like a blur, effortlessly dodging slimes while a red-haired girl did the same nearby. The proctor wondered if perhaps a new record will be set, impressed by their talent. The proctor glanced at me and asked Smith if the child he helped earlier was also a commoner. He was clearly curious why someone like me was performing so well. Smith watched me with a mysterious look in his eyes. He said I was an interesting one, and might show them something fascinating today. He was clearly betting on me to do something big. The proctor adjusted his glasses, looking puzzled. He said that, however, for a while now, something strange had been happening, pointing toward the center of the arena. He noted that I hadn't moved a single step. I was standing perfectly still, my eyes closed as slimes fell and bounced all around me without touching me. It must have been a crazy sight. The absolute madness of the arena, but in the very center I was like a statue in a storm. I wasn't dodging or blocking, I was just there. Other examinees were already mocking me. One guy shouted about what I was doing, convinced that the slimes were too fast for me to keep up and that I had finally reached my limit. Another noble sneered that a commoner is a commoner in the end, and I'll get knocked out soon anyway. They were all laughing, but they had no idea what was actually happening. Suddenly, a massive blue slime, much bigger than the others, started falling directly from above. It was aimed right at my head, and it was moving at incredible speed. I didn't open my eyes, just standing there as the giant slime closed the distance. Was I giving up, or was I waiting for the perfect moment to strike? The exam was about to be continued. I stood perfectly still, a picture of calm as several blue slimes hurtled toward me. I wasn't even looking at them, my focus was internal, as I prepared for a display of speed that was about to break everyone's brain. In a flash of blue light, I dodged the incoming slimes with movements so fast they left streaks in the air. The other candidates could only watch in shock, their mouths hanging open at the sheer speed of this commoner. One noble examinee yelled, wondering how I dodged. Another was just as stunned, thinking there was absolutely no way I should have been able to evade that point-blank barrage. Another slime streaked through the air like a blue bullet, but compared to my reaction time, it might as well have been moving in slow motion. I'm just on a completely different level of perception. The slime I just dodged slammed into the arena floor with a heavy thud, sending up a small shockwave of dust. I was already repositioning, my eyes scanning for the next threat before the first one even settled. Check out that look. Pure, icy determination. I gave a quick glance to my side, my face barely showing any strain as I prepared for the next wave of attacks. The sky over the arena was practically raining blue slimes now, falling in perfectly straight, lethal lines. I stayed grounded, my mind working 100 miles an hour as I calculated every single trajectory. That arrogant noble from earlier was back to his usual self, smirking like a villain as he watched the slimes descend. He thought there was no way I could dodge that, convinced he was about to see me get flattened. My face was a mask of zen-like calm, my eyes slightly hooded as I entered a deep state of focus. This isn't just talent, it's the result of training that would kill a normal person. I closed my eyes for a split second, cutting off my visual input to sharpen my other senses and my mental processing power. This was the calm before the absolute storm. A memory hits me, a younger me standing in a frozen, snowy landscape. A text bubble simply says, "Throw rocks." My childhood was anything but normal. Little did they know what was coming next. A group of village kids were holding stones, looking totally confused and a little worried. One asked if I was serious, while another pointed out that it could be really dangerous if one actually hit me. Young me just smiled, holding a small pocket watch as I told them it was fine. I had this, "I know something you don't" vibe as I explained there was a specific technique I wanted to test out. The kids gave in and started hurling rocks at me with everything they had. One yelled for me to make sure I dodged as the stones flew through the cold air toward me. Rocks were flying from every direction, looking like a miniature version of the slime exam. Even as a little kid, I was training my brain to process high-speed projectiles in a lethal environment. Back in the present, my eye had this intense, target-like pattern glowing in it. I explained my process in my mind. I trained to rapidly transmit information from the parietal lobe to the cerebellum. Talk about using 100% of your brain. I could feel a mental map of my brain lighting up with neural pathways as I calculated the attack trajectories in real time. I was basically a living supercomputer, processing data faster than the eye can see. More brain visualizations showed the sheer complexity of what I was doing. I truly believed that if I could react instantly to my calculations, I should be able to handle any attack imaginable. First, I collect. I stood in the center of the arena, my mind gathering data on every single falling slime. The pressure was on, but I was right in my element. Then, I calculate. My eye narrowed, the glowing blue pattern spinning as I locked onto every trajectory. The world around me slowed down as my brain finished its high-speed computations. Finally, I evade. In a series of minimal, perfectly timed movements, I wove through the slimes like I was dancing. I was barely moving an inch more than necessary, making the impossible look effortless. The other examinees were completely floored, their faces pale as they watched me perform literal miracles. They were realizing that they weren't even playing the same game as me. I took a quick breath and wiped my forehead, letting out a small cheer. Even I was a bit impressed by how well my void combat calculation was working today. The memory of the kids running up to me, shouting in excitement, asking how I did that, if it was a new technique, and how cool it was. They were looking at me like I was a superhero already, and this was just the beginning for them. Young me held up a finger like a teacher, explaining the name of my masterpiece. I call it Void Combat Calculation. The other kids were just baffled, trying to wrap their heads around the name. Back in the present, I gave a small, confident smirk, knowing the outcome. I knew exactly how this fight was going to end because I had already played it out in my head a dozen times. The outcome of battle, the words hung in the air as I prepared for my counterattack. I wasn't just dodging anymore. I was taking control of the entire arena. I stood amidst the falling slimes, a blue aura beginning to flare around me. It's a technique, I thought, as the energy built up for my next move. It's a technique that predicts the outcome. Every movement, every bounce, every impact. I knew where it was going before it even happened. I was essentially seeing the future through pure math. My eyes glowed with a brilliant blue light, and static energy crackled around my head. I was fully synchronized with my void calculation now, reaching a peak state of martial arcane power. The world through my eyes was filled with physics and math equations. I saw the momentum, velocity, and trajectory of every slime as they fell, turning a chaotic battlefield into a solvable problem. More equations overlaid the slimes as they zipped through the air. I was processing their mass and force in real time, ensuring that every dodge I made was the most efficient possible. From above, I visualized the arena floor as a giant calculation grid, with me at the very center of a massive web of energy. I was the master of this entire coordinate plane. I noted that while the slimes were fast and powerful, they could only charge in straight lines. It was their fatal flaw, and I was exploiting it for everything it was worth. I calculated the angles and speeds of their rebounds off the walls and floor, creating a map of their movements in my mind. I was essentially playing a high-speed game of billiards where I was the only player. It's easy to dodge, I thought, sliding across the arena floor with zero effort. The slimes were whizzing past me, missing by mere inches as I moved through the chaos like a ghost. I kept a mental tally of my score as I wove through the attacks. 4 dodges, 8 points. I was already thinking about the next step. I gripped my training sword, the handle creaking under my strength. It was time to stop dodging and start earning those 5-point defeat bonuses. What happened next was hard for them to believe. In a single fluid motion, I slashed through multiple slimes at once. A brilliant blue arc of energy followed my blade, clearing out a huge chunk of the enemy wave. I roared, "It's my turn." I had stopped being the target and had officially become the hunter in this arena. I unleashed my martial arts, Sword Slash, a series of high-speed cuts that turned the falling slimes into blue mist. The sheer skill on display was enough to make any professional swordsman jealous. Kain Oranka looked absolutely stunned. Even the top noble heir couldn't believe a commoner possessed this level of technical mastery. The proctors were losing their minds up in the booth. One asked if I was actually reading the slime's movements, and the other could only agree, noting my incredible perception. They exclaimed that I rivaled even a fighter. For an academy proctor to compare a 13-year-old applicant to a ranked professional fighter was the ultimate compliment. Kain watched me with a new look of respect. He must have realized that I wasn't just lucky. I was a practitioner of specialized combat techniques. He probably decided right then that he needed to team up with me. I stood ready, my breathing perfectly controlled even after that intense flurry. I was scanning for more points, my competitive fire burning brighter than ever. Another one came hurtling toward me, but I had already locked on. I wasn't going to let a single point slip through my fingers. With a shout of swordsmanship, sword pierce, I lunged forward with a lightning-fast thrust, skewering the slime and claiming another 5 points. I was a literal point-grinding machine. But just as I was about to land another hit, a rapier suddenly flashed into view and stole my kill. Kain and Oranka had entered the fray, showing off some pretty impressive speed of his own. I gave Kain a look of pure annoyance, my face clouded in shadow. I asked if he was stealing my kill. I don't take kindly to people messing with my score. Kain just smirked, looking totally unbothered. He said something like that, but what he stole wasn't from me, already planning his next witty remark. He flicked his rapier with practiced grace, sending the defeated slime flying away as he kept his eyes on the rest of the arena. The slime was neatly sliced in two, showing that Kain's precision was almost a match for my own skill. We were definitely the top dogs of this exam, but fate had other plans. Kain glanced over at Sheath's group of nobles, who were busy struggling with their own slimes. He started to say, "But," his smirk widening as he prepared to make a move. He revealed that he's been intentionally poaching kills from them, the other arrogant nobles, to keep them from ranking up. He's got a bit of a devious side, doesn't he? He introduced himself as Kain and asked if I wanted to steal points together, extending an olive branch. It was a rare offer from a high-ranking noble heir to a commoner. I didn't look impressed, staring back at him with a skeptical expression. I wasn't used to nobles being this straightforward, and I definitely wasn't looking for a leader. I set some ground rules. I told him, just to be clear, I only wanted to rank high, and while we were at it, we should compete to see who could get more points. I turned his partnership offer into a competition. Kain's eyes lit up with a competitive fire. He challenged me to show him my full power, clearly excited to finally have someone who could actually push him. I gave a wicked smirk of my own. I told him he seemed confident in his skills. Fine, if he insisted. I was ready to take the training wheels off and show him what real strength looks like. My arm started to glow with a brilliant blue energy as I prepared my next move. The air around me felt electric, and I could tell something massive was coming. We stood back to back, a formidable duo if ever there was one. I added a spicy condition: the loser has to do whatever the winner says. Kain was intrigued, noting that I was the first person to ever make demands of him. One of Sheath's lackeys was watching us from a distance, sweating buckets as he realized just how powerful we were. He muttered in frustration, sensing that their plan was already falling apart. Lord Sheath was fuming, holding his bow with white-knuckled intensity. His group discussed their orders from him, now that I had teamed up with Kain. They were planning a dirty sneak attack in the middle of the exam chaos. Sheath gave a sinister, shadowed grin. He agreed. Yeah, this guy was officially the biggest scumbag in the academy, and he was about to make things very ugly for us. A slime was hurtling toward them, but Sheath's group didn't even care about the exam points anymore. They were 100% focused on taking Kain and me down by any means necessary. Sheath roared for them to do it as he drew his bow back to the limit. He wasn't aiming for a slime this time. His sights were locked firmly on me, and that's when everything changed. I saw the arrow fly in a flash. Kain and I stood our ground, and I sensed the incoming threat with a sharp backward glance. A flurry of arrows rained down on us, coming from Sheath's group. I was already looking over my shoulder, my superbrain calculating the new, lethal trajectories. The arrows streaked through the air, creating a dangerous crossfire in the center of the arena. This was way beyond playing dirty. This was an assassination attempt disguised as a test. Kain was caught off guard, a look of shock on his face as an arrow whizzed past his head. He wasn't expecting his fellow nobles to stoop this low in front of the principal. Sheath smirked, already reaching for another arrow. He thought he had us cornered, and he was clearly enjoying every second of it. This guy was a total menace. But wait, I let out a cool, mocking sound. I was still standing, and I had that look on my face that meant I had just done something impossible. Sheath's eyes were practically popping out of his head as he screamed in disbelief. He was staring at something that should be physically impossible for a commoner kid to do. I was standing there calmly, holding several arrows, including the energy-enhanced ones, tightly in my bare hand. I literally caught a lethal magical attack like it was a fly. Sheath and his lackey were sweating buckets now. They stammered, wondering how I caught the arrow with my bare hands, completely unable to process how anyone could have the reaction speed to do that. I stood by Kain, who asked if I was okay. I just shrugged it off like it was nothing, calling Sheath and his group scum for playing dirty. I was literally the coolest guy in the room right now. Sheath was absolutely fuming, aiming his next arrow with a trembling hand. He shrieked, asking who I was calling scum. His pride finally shattered into a million tiny pieces. This kid was in for a world of hurt. Sheath unleashed his signature move, Double Arrow Edge, firing 2 arrows wreathed in dark purple energy. These weren't ordinary projectiles. They were designed to pierce through any basic defense. The dark arrows zoomed across the arena like homing missiles, aimed right at Kain and me. The sheer force of them was enough to make the air vibrate with dark power. Kain was frantically parrying the ordinary arrows with his rapier, but he was clearly struggling with the sheer number of them. He gasped at this level, realizing he might have underestimated Sheath's desperation. One of the purple energy arrows loomed large, closing the distance in the blink of an eye. It was a terrifying sight, and it was heading straight for a direct hit. Kain was frozen for a split second, his eyes wide as the dark arrow approached his chest. He was paralyzed by the suddenness of it all, and it looked like it was game over for the Oranka heir. Suddenly, a massive burst of dark energy exploded. It looked like a lethal impact, and you were left wondering if either of us survived that point-blank blast. My hand was literally dripping blood after I caught those high-speed arrows from the noble group. Kain looked absolutely horrified, realizing that I just took a massive hit to protect him. Kain reached out, shouting for me to check my hand, but I was already in a different headspace. I narrowed my eyes, my silver hair shadowing my face as I coldly realized their target was me. Up in the observation deck, the proctors were sweating buckets. One of them noted that the attack had clear malicious intent and asked the principal if they should disqualify the noble group immediately. Principal Smith kept his cool, his purple eyes fixed on the arena below. He decided not to disqualify them yet, saying they'll lose anyway if left alone, but he told the staff to prepare healing potions for the aftermath. Back on the floor, gravity was still crushing everyone, but Kain and I were standing our ground. I called out to Kain, my voice steady despite the injury, as more slimes continued to fall around us. I wound up my sword arm, looking like a pro player getting ready to clear the bases. I asked Kain if he's ever heard of baseball, which was such a flex in the middle of a magical exam. 2 slimes came screaming down at high speed, but I was already moving. I wasn't dodging this time. I was calculating the perfect moment to strike back. In a display of insane speed, I leaped into the air and caught a slime mid-flight. My body was surrounded by blue sparks as I used my martial arcane techniques to literally grab a monster. My eye glowed with that familiar target pattern as I completed my calculations. I thought that I had no choice but to do this, my teeth bared in a determined grin as I prepared to return fire. I spun mid-air. A blue slime stuck to the end of my training sword like a piece of gum. I was generating a massive amount of centrifugal force for what's coming next. With a shout to launch, I hurled the slime with the strength of a railgun, aimed straight at the noble group who tried to snipe me. It looked like a blue meteor was about to ruin their whole day. The noble archer was frozen in shock as the projectile screamed toward him. He was so busy playing dirty that he forgot who he was dealing with, and now it was way too late to run. But things were about to get worse for him. With a massive boom, the slime hit the archer with a devastating sound, the impact creating a massive blast of blue energy. I wasn't just defending anymore, I was officially hunting the hunters. The poor noble was sent flying backward, screaming in pain as he was literally blown off the stage. I really don't hold back when someone messes with me. A message appeared over the fallen noble, number 438, disqualified. He tried to call it a commoner's game, but he's the one ending up on the floor with 0 points and a bruised ego. The rest of the noble group was freaking out, watching their friend get taken out in a single shot. I was standing there looking totally unfazed, which was honestly the scariest part for them. The second archer was frantically looking around, his bow shaking. He stammered in frustration, wondering where I went, realizing that I had completely vanished from his line of sight. I shouted at him over here, dropping from above like a ninja and surprising the archer from behind. I was moving so fast that it was like I was teleporting around the arena. I delivered a high-speed strike to another noble, the impact creating a massive explosion. I shouted, "Number 2," keeping a mental tally of everyone I was knocking out. Another noble got a slime point blank to the face. It was a brutal moment as the blue blob completely overwhelmed her defense. I was just cleaning house at this point. She was sent spiraling through the air, hitting the ground with a heavy thud. It was absolute carnage for the noble group, and the proctors just had to sit there and watch it happen. The last remaining noble of the group was sweating buckets, his face a mask of pure terror. He gasped, realizing he was the only one left facing this monster. I appeared right behind him, whispering that he's the last one into his ear. That was some straight-up horror movie energy right there. He'd probably pass out too. I stood over the last guy with my sword resting on my shoulder, looking totally bored. The noble tried one last desperate threat, saying the seniors won't stay quiet about a mere commoner interfering. I accidentally stepped on the guy's foot, causing him to scream in pain. I said that hurt with zero sincerity, which was honestly top-tier petty behavior. Little did they know what was coming next. The noble fell backward, clutching his foot, while Kain watched from a distance. Kain added to be more careful next time, clearly enjoying seeing these snobs get put in their place. Kain walked up to me and gave me a friendly smile. He thanked me for earlier and asked if my hand was okay, showing genuine concern for the commoner who just saved his neck. I looked at my bandaged hand and gave Kain a sharp grin. I said yeah, and that he was pretty decent for a noble, which was basically the highest compliment he was going to get from me. Kain told me not to lump him in with the other nobles, revealing his true status. He asked if I had ever heard of the great families, because he's from one of them, the Oranka family. He said it with pride and for good reason. I'd heard about them. The great families had immense influence, having produced multiple grandmasters and sages. They rivaled even the royal family and the Arcanist Association in terms of raw power. I wasn't impressed, just thinking about the great families and how there are all kinds of nobles. I was too busy taking out more slimes to care about someone's fancy family tree. The other examinees were getting fed up with me. They shouted in frustration that a commoner was interfering, their noble pride being wounded more than their bodies at this point. A group of 3 angry nobles surrounded me, looking like they were ready for a brawl. The leader snarled that they won't let me take any more points, his veins popping out of his forehead. They all charged at once, screaming that commoners should just disappear, completely forgetting about the actual exam. It had turned into a full-on noble versus commoner war in the center of the arena. Another group of students saw Kain being surrounded and decided to step in. They shouted that Lord Kain was being targeted and that they should help him, drawing their weapons to defend their golden boy. They screamed to beat down those lower-class nobles. The arena was now a total free-for-all, with teams of students clashing everywhere. The slimes were the least of their worries now. It was absolute chaos. Swords were clashing, shields were bashing, and everyone was yelling. The proctor noted that it had turned into a free-for-all and told everyone to be careful. In another part of the arena, a red-haired girl with a staff watched the fighting with a sinister smirk. She said this was getting interesting, clearly a fan of the mayhem. She called out to her teammate Miliana, and they both charged into the fray. These two looked like they were ready to rack up some serious points while everyone else was distracted, and this decision would change everything. I was in the middle of a dodge, thinking about how annoying it was that so many people were targeting me. I knew that if I scored any more points, things were just going to get more troublesome. A slime suddenly bounced toward me, and I had to perform a backbend dodge to avoid it. I let out a surprise sound, as the gravity started making even my movements feel a bit sluggish. Miliana, the light blue-haired girl, sent a noble examinee flying. She was moving with surprising speed and skill for someone who looked so young. A massive burst of orange energy cleared a huge section of the arena. Some heavy hitters were finally making their move, and they weren't playing around. Students were being launched into the air as a giant hammer smashed into the floor. This guy was literally a human wrecking ball. Meet the red-haired hammer guy. He was laughing his head off, looking like he was having the time of his life. He bellowed that this was great, just great, clearly enjoying the chaos. He stood over a pile of defeated nobles, his massive hammer resting on his shoulder. He said with a wide, manic grin that punching people was way more fun. He finished by saying, "It's more fun than beating up slimes." He swung that huge hammer with one hand like it was a toothpick. This guy was a literal powerhouse, and he was clearly targeting people over monsters. He went into a full spin, his hammer becoming a blur of destruction. He was creating a whirlwind that was knocking back anyone unlucky enough to be nearby. The hammer guy screamed for everyone to move, his eyes glowing with an intense, crazed light. He'd lost all chill and was just looking for the next thing to smash. It was utter devastation. Students were being blown away like leaves in a hurricane, with pained cries being heard from every corner. He stood triumphant, his hammer planted in the ground as dust settled around him. He was a one-man army, and nobody seemed brave enough to step up and stop him. The arena floor was littered with defeated candidates. Some of them looked like they'd seen a ghost. The hammer guy was just standing there, looking for his next victim. Back in the observation deck, the proctors were looking a bit worried. One asked the principal if they should stop this, but Smith just sighed and said, "Youthful energy is important." This guy was basically letting them kill each other. The proctor with the green hair noted that it might be problematic if all the nobles end up disqualified. She was worried about the political fallout of a commoner and some rowdy kids taking out the elite heirs, but fate had other plans for them. Principal Smith gave her a hard look, his voice cold. He reminded her that this place has its own rules. He wasn't going to let noble politics mess with the integrity of his exam. Smith said firmly not to worry about public opinion. He was the boss, and he was making sure everyone knew that the only thing that mattered in this arena was strength. He said, "Understood," as a massive beam of light shot down from the ceiling, signaling the end of the test. It was a literal act of God moment that brought the whole free-for-all to a screeching halt. Smith announced that with this, the second exam was over. The blue gravity lines finally faded away, and everyone could finally breathe normally again. Smith said that they'll announce the scores and rankings of successful candidates later, pointing toward the exit. He was already done with the show and ready for the next round. The earth magic effect was finally gone, and students were collapsing in heaps on the floor. One guy groaned that he was exhausted, his sword clattering onto the stones. Staff members rushed in to attend to the injured examinees. It looked like a field hospital in the middle of the arena, with healers busy patching everyone up. I was given a high-grade magic potion to drink. I thought to myself, so this is a magic potion. What mysterious power it has, as I watched the green energy heal my injured hand instantly. I was shocked when I realized even basic potions cost 3 silver coins. I muttered, "That's way too expensive," my commoner instincts kicking in. Kain overheard me and asked what was wrong with a confused look. Kain gave me a cocky smirk and said that even if he won, he wouldn't bully me, so I should relax. He was still acting like the superior noble, which just made me let out a tired sigh. Principal Smith snapped his fingers, and a massive glowing scroll appeared in the center of the arena. It was the moment of truth, time to see who made the cut. The scroll unrolled with a dramatic sound, revealing the names of the top candidates. Kain asked what rank I got, as everyone gathered around to see the results. Suddenly, the nobles started laughing their heads off. They mocked that the commoner isn't even on the rankings. I looked at the board, realizing that only the top 6 places were listed. Kain and I looked up at the scroll in silence. Kain muttered about there being no name, his eyes wide with disbelief as he searched for his new rival's name. And that's when everything changed. The proctor announced that the top 5 examinees this time all exceeded past record scores. It was a historic result, and the tension in the room was at an all-time high. 5th place was Miliana Royce. The young blue-haired girl from earlier took her spot on the leaderboard. She looked pretty proud of herself, and rightly so. 4th place was Kain Oranka. The crowd went silent as the Oranka heir was announced at only 4th place. Kain looked absolutely fuming, his eyes burning with frustration. 3rd place was Faye Durahan. The red-haired staff girl took the bronze medal spot. She gave a confident side glance, showing that she knew she was one of the best. I was standing there with a dark, shadowed look on my face. I wondered if my name really wasn't being called, and if I got disqualified for attacking those scumbags. This was a massive cliffhanger. Where the heck was I in the rankings? The announcement finally came, and it was a shocker. 2nd place, Louis Kirill, with a record-shattering 887 points. This commoner kidme was literally making history right now. Kain Oranka looked completely stunned, his jaw practically on the floor. He stammered, wondering who that was, unable to process that a random kid just outranked the heir of a great family. I just gave him a mysterious look, my silver hair shadowing my eyes. I said it's a secret, clearly enjoying the chaos my presence was causing among the elite. Kain sighed, admitting defeat for now, but he was already planning his comeback. I just reminded him that we had a bet to settle after the exam, and he gave a cool acknowledgement. The tension in the arena hit a fever pitch as the announcer reached the final reveal. He announced that the glorious 1st place goes to... The crowd watched with bated breath as the final name was about to be shown. It was an unprecedented situation, 2 commoners potentially taking the top 2 spots in the most prestigious academy in the Empire. The winner was announced, Neil Gunn, with a massive 888 points. He beat me by a single point, but both of us absolutely destroyed the previous academy records. Neil Gunn was sitting there looking like an absolute beast, his red hair matching his wild, competitive energy. He grinned that there are some interesting ones here and told them not to disappoint him. The other examinees were whispering in shock. They were talking about that huge guy, how 2 commoners were in 1st and 2nd place, and how we even ranked higher than Faye from the Durahan family. They were realizing that the status quo just got blown out of the water. Faye Durahan, the 3rd place winner, looked over at the young girl Miliana Royce. Miliana was holding her staff tight, clearly intimidated by the high-level powerhouses that just emerged. Faye stood there with her massive sword, looking every bit the noble warrior. She was already sizing up the competition, thinking to herself that she'd love to have a match with someone as strong as Neil. The arrogant nobles who were mocking me earlier were now seething in a corner. They muttered about losing to mere commoners, their pride completely shattered by the results. One of the proctors was laying into them, calling them a useless disgrace to nobility. He was clearly not happy that the elites were outclassed so thoroughly by people they considered trash. Little did they know what was coming next. Up in the observation deck, another proctor noted that commoners taking 1st and 2nd was unprecedented. Even more shocking, both of us were from an orphanage. That was a major plot point right there. Principal Smith looked down at the candidates with a knowing, heavy gaze. He asked if they knew why the Arcanist Association runs orphanages, hinting at a much deeper, darker secret behind the Academy's intake. It was a dramatic sight, Neil and I standing side by side, wreathed in red and blue energy. The message was clear. True strength has nothing to do with social status. We were the living proof of that. Principal Smith addressed the remaining 1,000 examinees. He told those of us who passed the 2nd exam to proceed to the next venue. It was time for the final stage, and things were about to get even crazier. Kain walked over to me, noting how close I was to 1st place. He wondered which of the 2 of us was stronger, but I just gave a non-committal who knows as we headed out. We arrived at the 3rd training ground, which looked like a massive, dense forest. Principal Smith announced that the final exam, or rather the survival test, was about to begin. The survival test, Emblem Battle Royale. Smith floated above us, looking like a god as he explained the rules of this brutal game. He started distributing glowing gold emblems to all the candidates. He also explained that upperclassmen would use teleportation magic to drop us somewhere random in the forest. Kain and I looked at our new emblems, realizing the danger we were in. Smith explained that our goal was to collect as many emblems as possible, and any method was allowed. It was basically the Hunger Games, Magic Edition. The penalty for failure was instant. Examinees who lost their emblem were immediately disqualified. There were no second chances in this forest. The ultimate prize was revealed. Only the top 10 based on final emblem count will gain admission. Out of the thousands who started, only 10 will make it. The odds were absolutely brutal. The group decided to split up for now, with Kain noting that those who ranked high earlier will be primary targets. I agreed, saying I'd do my best to survive. I found myself alone in the forest, gripping my emblem. I realized the Academy announced the exact rankings just to create this exact target on your back situation. Principal Smith gave a final, chilling command. He told us to demonstrate our abilities to the fullest. He was clearly enjoying this high-stakes social experiment, and this was just the beginning. He told us to survive until the end. Admission was just one step away. The scene faded to the dense woods, where the hunt was already beginning. A heavy boot slammed into the ground right behind me. A voice yelled for the commoner, and I knew trouble had found me before I could even get my bearings. It was a huge noble candidate with a giant axe, and he looked absolutely livid. He said he found me, and that I really humiliated them nobles. He was out for blood, not just emblems. I gave him a cold, sidelong glance. I wasn't scared, I was just annoyed that my peaceful start was interrupted so quickly. The axe guy was joined by several others, including an archer. They laughed, saying that Kain isn't here and no one's gonna protect me, thinking they've got an easy kill. I looked around at my attackers, my eyes scanning for an escape route or a counterattack. I knew I was outnumbered, but I was already calculating their moves. The noble group spread out, surrounding me in a small clearing. The archer had his crossbow cocked and ready, while the axe wielder prepared to charge. That's when it hit me. This was suspicious. I figured the teleportation staff must have leaked my location. This wasn't just a random encounter, it was a coordinated hit. The axe guy yelled, "That's enough chit-chat," and leaped into the air with an overhead swing. He was putting all his weight into this strike, aiming to split me in two. He screamed for me to die, bringing the axe down with a massive thud, but I just barely managed to sidestep the impact, the blade smashing the ground where I stood. Two more nobles charged in with spears and swords. They yelled that I wouldn't escape, trying to catch me while I was still recovering from the axe swing. In a blur of speed, I leaped into the air and performed a perfect backflip, dodging multiple spear thrusts and arrows. My agility is literally off the charts. I landed smoothly, but I was already sensing something else coming. I gave a sharp look behind me as a sudden flash of light caught my eye. I performed a mid-air parry, my training sword clashing against a glowing green blade. The impact sent sparks flying, and I could tell I was dealing with someone who actually knew how to fight. But things were about to get worse. I skidded across the grass, my sword drawn. What was that? I was clearly surprised by the speed of that last attack. The axe guy was back on his feet, looking even angrier than before. He screamed that I would die here and should just give up already, but he was looking increasingly desperate. I was forced into a multi-pronged defense, clashing blades with three nobles at once. The sound of steel on steel echoed through the forest as I held them all off simultaneously. One of the nobles tried to flank me, but I caught his blade with my own, the sparks lighting up the scene. I was fighting with a level of precision that was almost scary. Suddenly, a series of glowing green blades streaked through the air toward me. It looked like some kind of high-speed wind magic, and it was coming fast. My eyes widened as I realized I had to dodge again. I gritted my teeth, my superbrain already calculating the trajectories of these new projectiles. I parried one of the wind blades with a well-timed swing, but more were coming. This wasn't just a physical fight anymore. There was high-level magic involved now. The noble mage who was firing the wind blades let out a wicked laugh. He shouted for me to take this, clearly enjoying seeing the commoner trash struggle. He gloated, surprised I could keep up with wind arrows flying at me, since I'm a commoner who can't even use magic. But he was just giving me more data to process. I continued to weave through the attacks, my movements minimal and efficient. The nobles groaned in frustration, unable to believe I kept dodging. I took a quick look at the glowing green trails left by the magic. I thought to myself that I can't calculate magic trajectories, realizing my void calculation had a major weakness. I took a deep breath, my expression becoming even more focused. I whispered to myself that in that case, I'll switch up my tactics. I pictured a silhouette of a martial arts move. I'll use sen no sen, a counterattack before they strike. I was going back to my roots as a grandmaster of combat theory. My eyes glowed with a new, intense blue light. I declared that I'll use the enemy's power against them. This is the hallmark of a true master, turning your opponent's strength into their greatest flaw. The leader of the noble group was getting impatient. He screamed for everyone to stop spacing out and attack at once, ordering his team to launch a full-on final assault. The nobles all charged at the same time, a whirlwind of blades and magic converging on me. It was a make-or-break moment, and the air was thick with killing intent. I just let out a cool huff, a sharp grin spreading across my face. I wasn't just ready, I had been waiting for them to make this move. With a shout of perfect timing, I leaped forward, turning the table on my attackers. I was no longer the target. I was the one controlling the flow of the entire battle. What happened next was hard for them to believe. I caught one noble's sword swing mid-air. The noble shouted that he got me, thinking he'd landed a hit, but he had already fallen right into my trap. Using the noble's momentum, I spun him around and used his body as a shield against the other attackers. I was literally treating these guys like training dummies. I delivered a devastating elbow strike to the noble I was holding with a massive crunching sound. This wasn't magic, it was pure, brutal efficiency. In a series of rapid-fire panels, I took down 2 more nobles with a spinning kick and a well-placed palm strike. I was moving with such grace that it was almost like I was dancing through the clearing. One noble got launched into the air, screaming in shock, while another hit the ground hard with a pained cry. The entire ambush was being dismantled in seconds. The mage tried to fire one last wind blast, but I was already there, parrying the attack and closing the distance. The fight was basically over at this point. Suddenly, a massive green energy blast cleared the area. It seemed someone else was watching the fight and decided to end it with a bang. I looked over as more nobles were launched into the air. I was clearly not the only one cleaning house in this section of the forest. A noble tried to charge me again, but he got hit with a direct energy blast that sent him flying. I just watched, curious about who my mysterious benefactor might be. One noble hit the ground hard with a curse while I stood by calmly. The entire ambush group had been completely wiped out. I rested my sword on my shoulder, looking totally unfazed. I was ready to move on, but I had to check one more thing before I left. A massive energy beam came crashing down from above, obliterating a nearby tree with a huge explosion. Someone screamed, caught in the blast. The tree was literally vaporized, showing just how much power was behind that strike. This was definitely high-level magic, way above the level of the nobles I just fought. I took a quick look at the aftermath, noticing a pile of defeated nobles lying in the bushes. It was a clean sweep, and I was the one standing triumphant, but fate had other plans. I noticed several emblems lying on the ground, glowing with a soft golden light. It seemed my attackers were carrying quite a few between them. I reached down and picked up their emblems with a soft sound. I had officially started my collection for the admission requirement. I coolly said that I'll be taking them, looking at the defeated pile. I'm not one to let good loot go to waste, especially when it's so essential for passing the test. The leader of the noble group looked up with a mask of pure, veins-popping rage. He shrieked, telling me not to overthink it, still unable to accept that he lost to a commoner. A shadow fell over him. A voice asked if he was talking to him by any chance, and I could tell by the tone that this person was way more dangerous than any common noble. It was Kain Oranka. He dropped down from the trees, landing with a heavy thud. He looked totally bored, like he was just taking a walk in the park. Kain was sitting on a high branch, dangling his feet and looking down at the groaning noble. He said, "Too bad, the noble can't use magic anymore," all with a cocky grin. The noble was absolutely losing his mind. He stammered, asking Kain why he was here, as their comrades should be holding him back, clearly shocked by Kain's sudden appearance. Kain gave a chilling smirk. He said he made them tell him their plan, and mocked them for trying to stall him with those guys. He was clearly way smarter than the group of nobles he was currently mocking. The noble snapped, screaming that he'll take us both down, while his face literally turned purple with rage. He had officially lost all touch with reality. Kain just sighed and gave him a quick tap with the hilt of his sword, sending him back to the ground with a thud. It was a merciful end to a very one-sided encounter. I walked over, looking a bit annoyed by the noise. I said it was so noisy and told Kain he was safe, which was basically the highest level of friendship he was going to get from me. Kain hopped down and handed me a handful of emblems he collected. He said they were just low-level nobles who just learned magic, no big deal, matching my cocky energy as he handed over the spoils. I took the emblems but added a warning. I said that if this kept happening, it'll be troublesome, and asked if he wanted help. Kain just gave me a confident, "No, he'll handle his own problems. We were a regular pair of lone wolves, aren't we?" Suddenly, someone started clapping from the shadows. A voice said, "That's well said, and that's what they like to hear." It was the red-haired staff girl, Fray, and she looked like she was about to make things very interesting for us. The red-haired girl I saw earlier, Fray Durahan, stepped forward with her spear and a scary amount of confidence. She didn't waste any time and looked me dead in the eye, simply telling me to fight her. Kain filled me in on the lore, identifying her as Fray Durahan, the daughter of a Grand Master. Between her high ranking and her family name, she was basically royalty in the martial world. I was totally unfazed and asked Kain if they were friends or something. Kain got all defensive, shouting that a muscle-brained girl like her was definitely not his friend while he looked away in annoyance. Kain admitted that he actually fought her before and lost. He tried to save face by claiming he just let his guard down a bit, but I wasn't buying the excuse for a second. Faye got annoyed by our side conversation and yelled at us to stop flirting and answer her. I suggested to Kain that it was probably better to just ignore her and keep collecting emblems, which was a massive diss. Faye was absolutely fuming now, calling Kain a coward for trying to run away with his friend just because he knows he can't win. She was definitely pushing all of Kain's buttons here. I finally gave in, telling her fine, with a cool look on my face. I admitted I had been wanting to see how a kid from one of those great families actually fights anyway. Faye got a wild look in her eyes, loving the challenge. To keep things fair, she declared she'll fight without using any magic, relying purely on her spear techniques. She didn't wait for a countdown. Faye lunged forward like a red blur, thrusting her spear at me with incredible speed. My eye narrowed as I locked onto the incoming strike. You could see the intensity in my gaze. I was in full calculation mode now. I parried the spear thrust with a single, precise swing of my training sword. The impact sent a shockwave through the clearing as we tested each other's strength. Faye gave me a sinister little smirk, clearly impressed that a commoner could stop her first move so easily. She seemed to realize that I was a different breed. I stood my ground, my sword held steady as I waited for her next move. Faye finished her thought, admitting that I was pretty good for someone without a noble name. Faye immediately doubled down, putting more power into her spear. She wasn't just poking anymore, she was looking to overwhelm my defense with raw physical force. And this was just the beginning. Sparks were literally flying as our weapons ground against each other. It was a classic power struggle, and neither of us was willing to back down an inch. Faye shouted for us to continue, spinning her spear to create a massive red whirlwind of energy. This wasn't magic, just pure technical skill that was honestly a bit terrifying to watch. She leaped high into the air, her silhouette looking like a demon against the sun. She called out her move, Sacred Lance, and I knew whatever was coming next was going to leave a crater. With a massive boom, she slammed the spear down with a Sacred Lance slam, creating a massive explosion of dust and debris. If I didn't move fast, I was definitely feeling that one. The proctors were watching the fight from the woods, totally mesmerized by the display of power. Even they didn't expect the exam to turn into a battle between monsters. One of the proctors noted that it's been a while since they've seen the Durhan family's spear techniques in person. He called Faye a total genius, impressed by how flawless her speed and power were. The proctors looked at each other, one of them admitting that the commoner boy-me was impressive too. But then he asked the big question, how long did he think I would last, as he predicted I would lose soon. They turned to Principal Smith and asked who he thought would walk away the winner. Smith was just standing there with his arms crossed, looking totally unbothered by the chaos. Smith's answer was pretty surprising. He said he liked me, but he didn't think I could actually beat Faye. He's seen what the great families are truly capable of. He explained that battle is a clash of body and will, but there's a gap in training and technique that can't always be bridged by talent alone. He was watching me very closely though. As the dust settled, I was revealed to be totally fine, standing in a defensive stance. I survived the slam, but Faye wasn't giving me any breathing room. Faye charged in again, staying low to the ground. She was going for another Sacred Lance technique, her spear glowing with that intense red aura. She unleashed a rush of multiple thrusts, her spear becoming a blur of red streaks. I was forced onto the defensive, barely parrying the relentless barrage. Faye looked a little frustrated, gritting her teeth and muttering in frustration because I was still standing. I was proving to be much harder to hit than she expected. My eyes flared with blue energy as I spotted an opening in her flurry. I thought I'd found an opening, my super brain finally finding the rhythm of her attacks. I saw a close-up of Faye's hand tightening on her spear. She was about to change her rhythm, and things were about to get even more intense. Little did she know what was coming next. I swung my sword horizontally, meeting the spear shaft with a heavy clang. I was trying to disrupt her momentum and take control of the exchange. In an insane move, I actually used my forearm to parry the shaft of the spear. That was some high-level martial arts right there. Don't try that at home. Faye let out a frustrated sound as her strike was deflected once again. She couldn't believe this commoner was reading her moves this accurately. I performed a massive leap backward, my eyes never leaving Faye as I gained some distance. I knew that staying too close to a spear user was a recipe for disaster. I landed perfectly on my feet, holding my sword ready. I was as cool as a cucumber, which had to be infuriating for a noble prodigy like Faye. Faye lowered her spear slightly, admitting that even the Oranka young master couldn't pull off a defense like that. She was finally acknowledging that I was in a league of my own. I just shrugged it off, telling her it's not that difficult if you just observe carefully. Talk about an elite level of humble bragging. Fay flared her aura again, her spear wreathed in orange flames. She screamed, "How about this?" preparing to launch her most powerful attack yet. She swung the spear in a massive arc, the impact with my sword creating a shower of sparks. The intensity of this fight was literally setting the air on fire. With a shout of "Sacred Lance, Crescent Fall," Fay brought the spear down in a devastating vertical chop. It was like a guillotine coming from my head. My mind was racing, analyzing every aspect of spear techniques, thrusts, sweeps, defense, and suppression. I was breaking down her entire style in real time. I realized that when her skill was combined with the spear's natural reach, it was quite troublesome to find a way in. But troublesome doesn't mean impossible for me. The battle turned into a beautiful, lethal dance of red and blue aura. Every slash and thrust was aimed at a vital point, and both of us were moving at speeds that defied logic. I wove through her attacks, noticing that while her style was powerful, it had several fatal weaknesses. I was a scholar of martial arts, and I was about to prove it. Fay gathered her energy into a protective bubble, her aura vibrating with power. She was preparing for a counter-thrust, but I was already one step ahead. I shouted out that one weakness is vulnerability in close combat, as I charged inside her reach, closing the distance before she could reset her stance. This is where a spear user is weakest. My eyes crackled with blue electricity as I prepared my countermove. I knew that if I timed this perfectly, the fight was over. I roared that I can counterattack with my swordsmanship, sword dance, unleashing a rapid-fire series of blue slashes and turning my defense into a devastating offensive flurry. I landed multiple hits on her aura, the blue energy clashing against her red shield. I was finally pushing the Grandmaster's daughter onto her back foot, and this decision would change everything. Fay gave a confident grin, telling me she knew exactly what I was aiming for, but then she started to say, "But," and I knew she had a nasty surprise waiting for me. She effortlessly deflected my sword dance with the shaft of her spear. She shouted that it won't work on her, proving that her defensive skills were just as elite as her attacks. Her footwork was incredible. Fay performed a high-speed pivot, her armor clanking as she shifted her weight for a massive counter-rotation. She spun her spear into a localized red cyclone, the wind pressure literally blowing me back. I was stunned, realizing that the Durahan family lance had no obvious weaknesses. I was caught in the turbulence, my hair blowing wild as I stared at the cyclone. I was starting to realize why Fay was considered such a monster. Her technique covered all her bases. Fay roared for me, Louis Carril, to brace myself, her face lit up with the fire of battle. She was going for the knockout blow right now. A massive blast of orange energy erupted from the center of the clearing. The power was so great that it looked like a small star just exploded on the stage. The proctors mentioned that even a grandmaster only learned that specific technique at age 16. To see Fay doing it now was truly remarkable talent. They thought it was unfortunate for me, basically calling the match. But I wasn't done. I gritted my teeth and called out my own defensive move, swordsmanship. Sword net. I spun my training sword with such incredible speed that it created a blue barrier of steel around me, blocking the fire. I held the line, my blades deflecting the flames and shockwaves. I thought to myself that the other weakness of her technique is high stamina consumption. I was planning to outlast her. With a clang, our weapons met again, sparks lighting up our determined faces. I was convinced that if I kept defending accurately, an opening would definitely appear. Fay kept the pressure on, her red cyclone still swirling violently. She was determined to break through my sword net before her stamina ran out. My target eye pattern flared to life again. I was scanning the cyclone for the slightest hiccup in her rotation, the one tiny gap I needed. I spotted the opening and lunged forward with a sudden, explosive thrust. I was betting everything on this one single strike. With a shattering sound, the wooden training sword I was using couldn't handle the pressure and exploded into a dozen pieces. This was a disaster. The broken tip of the blade fell slowly to the ground with a soft sound. I was now standing empty-handed against the daughter of a grandmaster, but fate had other plans. I was frozen for a split second, staring at my broken weapon with wide eyes. I was so close to landing the counter blow, but my gear let me down. Fay stopped her attack, her red eyes looking intensely at me. The silence in the clearing was heavy as both of us caught our breath. She admitted that I was impressive, acknowledging my skill. She knew that if my sword hadn't broken, my counterattack would have landed perfectly. I sighed, looking totally dejected. I said, "Yeah, it looks like my luck is terrible," which is honestly the most relatable thing I've said all day. It was a cute chibi moment where Fay was yelling at me for holding back. I apologized, saying it's just a habit to observe my enemies before going all out. But then the vibe shifted. I got this scary, shadowed look on my face and whispered that now, I'll get serious too. Oh boy, things were about to get real. Fay looked skeptical, pointing out that my weapon was already broken. She thought I was defenseless, but she clearly didn't know me well enough. I just waved my empty hand dismissively, looking totally unfazed by the lack of a sword. I had that, I don't need a weapon, energy that usually precedes a beatdown. I stepped forward and dropped into a perfect martial arts stance, my blue aura flaring around my feet. I declared that I'm better with my fists. This kid is literally built different. We locked eyes, searching for any opening. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife or a broken training sword. Fay tightened her grip, her eyes glowing with determination. She thought now was the time, launching herself forward for the final engagement. She stomped her boot into the ground, unleashing a wave of red shockwaves. She was using the environment to disrupt my balance before she landed her strike. Fay lunged with a spinning charge technique, her spear becoming a flaming drill of red energy. It looked like a move that could punch through a tank. I stayed grounded, pulling my fist back as the flaming drill closed in. I wasn't dodging, I was meeting this head on. Kain was screaming from the sidelines, warning me that if I took that technique head on, I'd be seriously injured. He was terrified for me, but I wasn't listening. I gathered a massive amount of blue aura into my open palms, the energy crackling with electricity. I was preparing a high-level martial arcane move to catch a literal lance charge. What happened next was hard for them to believe. It was a close-up of the red spinning energy about to collide with my hands. This was the definition of high stakes right here. With a clap, I caught the spinning spear tip right between my bare palms, the blue and red energy exploding outward. I actually stopped her charge with my hands. I let out a primal roar as I forced the spear back, my aura exploding into a pillar of blue light. This was some legendary strength on display. Kain's face said it all complete, utter disbelief. He just watched a commoner catch a great family's ultimate technique with his bare hands. Fay was sweating buckets, her face a mask of shock as she yelled, "That's impossible." Her entire worldview just got shattered by a kid from an orphanage. It must have been an epic sight. Me, standing firm, holding the flaming spear tip in my hands while lightning bolts arced through the air. I was officially a beast. Up in the observation deck, the proctors were absolutely losing their minds. They were questioning what I just did, wondering how a commoner could possess such high-level defensive techniques. Fay wasn't giving up that easily, though. She was crouching low, her red aura flaring up as she screamed that she's not done yet. She definitely had some pride as a noble warrior. She launched herself at me like a guided missile. Fay was betting everything on a single-point breakthrough, her eyes wide with a mix of desperation and intense focus. Fay swung her spear in a massive horizontal arc that kicked up a cloud of dust. I just barely avoided the strike, the blade whistling past my chest as I kept my cool. My eyes were completely focused, tracking every vibration in the air as I prepared for whatever crazy move Fay pulled out next. Fay's speed was reaching insane levels, creating multiple after images of herself around me. It was like I was being attacked by 5 people at once instead of just one. The red energy around Fay's spear started to spin violently, creating a lethal whirlwind. She was trying to trap me in a cage of high-speed strikes that left no room for escape. A massive vortex of spear thrusts surrounded me, looking like a blooming flower of death. It was a beautiful but terrifying display of the Durahan family's secret techniques. I just let out a calm huff with a small smirk. I was looking at this elite noble technique like it was just another Tuesday, which had to be infuriating for Fay. I yelled, "So what?" and leaped into action, my body becoming a blur as I used my specialized footwork. It looked like I'd grown 10 extra arms just to parry every single spear thrust coming my way. In a split-second close-up, my hand was perfectly tracking the spear's movement. I wasn't even using a weapon. I was taking on a legendary lance with my bare hands. With a loud clap, I actually caught the spinning spear tip between my palms. The blue energy from my martial arts was grinding against Fay's red aura, and neither side was budging. Sparks flew everywhere as I held the line against the rotational force. My physical strength is absolutely off the charts for someone my age. Fay's eyes were practically popping out of her head as she screamed in disbelief. She couldn't believe her family's ultimate spinning technique was just stopped by a pair of bare hands. Little did she know what was coming next. Principal Smith watched intently, his expression unreadable. He noted that I seemed to be stopping the spear's rotation using a very specific, high-level martial technique. The proctors were stunned, with one admitting he's never seen a technique like this before. I was a constant surprise, proving that commoners can have tricks even the elite don't know. My eyes glowed with an eerie blue light as I prepared to counter. I was about to show Fay that catching the spear was just the beginning of her problems. With a massive boom, a shockwave erupted between us as I released my pent-up energy. The impact was so strong it blew us both backward, creating a literal crater in the ground. Fay skidded across the grass, using her spear to stay upright. She was panting, her previous confidence completely gone as she stared at me in disbelief. She demanded to know what that strange technique was. She's never seen anyone manipulate force and rotation like that, especially someone who isn't even a ranked mage. I calmly explained that it's a type of parry where I add a twist matching the spear's movement. By doing that, I cancel out the rotational force entirely. Talk about a genius move. Faye looked totally baffled, a bunch of question marks appearing over her head. She was struggling to understand the words twist and parry. She was literally having a mental breakdown trying to understand the physics of my moves. I told her to just think of it as this kind of technique, not waiting for her to process it. I charged in low, my fist cocked back for a devastating follow-up strike. Faye barely had time to gasp as I closed the gap in the blink of an eye. She was completely on the defensive now, her spear being a liability in such close quarters. I was moving so fast I was just a blur against the background. I was taking full advantage of the opening I created, and I wasn't planning on stopping. Faye swung her spear low to clear some space, but I just leaped right over it. My agility is on another level, making it look like I was playing a game of hopscotch over a lethal weapon. I ducked under another high swing, the spear tip missing my head by mere inches. I was moving with a rhythmic grace that made every dodge look effortless and calculated. Faye was getting increasingly desperate, her swings becoming wider and less controlled. I was staying right in her blind spots, making her look like she was fighting a ghost, and this was just the beginning. I used my after images again to confuse her, circling around Faye like a shark. She was spinning around trying to find the real me, but I was always one step ahead. Kain was watching from the sidelines with his jaw dropped. He wondered if it was an optical illusion, completely unable to track my butterfly step movement. I visualized my footwork, with ghostly butterflies surrounding me. It's an elegant, legendary step that allows me to rapidly shift position without being caught. Faye growled that I was right in front of her, throwing a desperate punch. She had abandoned her spear for a second just to try and land any kind of hit on me. I just wove around her fist, looking incredibly bored. I explained in my head that the butterfly step is perfect for this situation, allowing me to stay safe while Faye wears herself out. Faye screamed in frustration, asking why she couldn't hit me. She was throwing everything she had, but I was just dancing around her like she was moving in slow motion. My footwork was so light, my boots were barely touching the ground, as I maintained a rhythm that was impossible for Faye to catch. It was pure technical mastery. I suddenly closed the distance, appearing right in Faye's personal space. This was the moment I was waiting for, the perfect time to end this fight once and for all. I landed a perfect palm strike right to Faye's chest. A massive shockwave rippled through the air as the impact sent a devastating thud across the clearing. Faye let out a choked groan as the air was driven from her lungs. She was being lifted off her feet by the pure force of my strike, her spear clattering to the ground. Kain was sweating buckets, completely speechless. He couldn't believe it. I blew Faye away. He was starting to realize just how big the gap was between him and me. Even the stoic Principal Smith looked surprised. He admitted this outcome was completely unexpected, staring at the silver-haired boy who just leveled an elite noble. Smith noted that even without magic, there aren't many people who can beat Faye Durahan in a straight fight. He was starting to suspect I might be something even more special than he thought. I stood over Faye as she struggled on the ground, the wind blowing through my hair. I probably looked like a true warrior, while the genius of hand-to-hand combat was left in the dust. But fate had other plans for her. Faye wasn't finished yet. She gritted her teeth, her eyes glowing with a renewed fire. She said she's not finished yet. She's Faye of the Durahan family. Pride is a hell of a drug, isn't it? I just watched her get back up, my expression going back to that cold, calculating focus. I was ready for round 2, and I wasn't going to show any mercy this time. Faye stamped her foot down, cracking the ground beneath her boot. She was gathering every ounce of strength she had left for one final, desperate charge. She abandoned her spear entirely and charged with her fists glowing red. Faye was shouting that she can't lose so easily, her aura exploding into a pillar of flame. I was actually surprised, wondering if she was using martial arts based on spear techniques. I was analyzing her new style on the fly, ever the scholar of combat. Faye lunged forward with a punch that looked like a spear thrust, shouting for me to take this. She was moving with more speed and power than she ever did with her weapon. I dropped into a classic Wing Chun stance, my hands moving in a defensive flow. I was meeting her raw power with refined, ancient techniques that were built for this. I used a Pak Sao slapping parry to deflect her punch, my hands moving so fast they were just a blur. I was redirecting her force with minimal effort, making her look clumsy. Faye roared, crushing fist first. She unleashed a massive, red energy punch that looked like it could level a building. She was putting her entire life into this one strike. I met her punch with my own, the two fists colliding with a world-shaking boom. The shockwave was so intense it literally cleared the forest around us. I reflected on the impact, noting that Faye's power was very similar to Inch power. I was genuinely impressed by her technique, even as I was fighting for my life. We separated, both breathing heavily. I gave her a nod of respect, admitting the Durhan family isn't just about spears. Their hand-to-hand game is no joke. Faye wasn't done, screaming, crushing fist third as she charged back in. She was throwing a relentless barrage of punches that looked like falling meteors. I shouted for her to bring it and entered a boxing stance. A giant green spectral boxer appeared behind me, mimicking my movements. Now it was a real fight. We exchanged a lightning-fast barrage of punches, our auras clashing with rapid impact sounds. It was the most intense exchange of the entire exam. I was actually grinning now, saying this was the dream I envisioned, fighting a strong opponent to my heart's content. I had finally found someone who could push me. The fight intensified as we both screamed for more. The energy between us was becoming unstable, a mix of red and blue light that was blinding to look at, and that's when everything changed. I felt my adrenaline peaking, a glowing red heart showing my martial heart was pumping, unlocking a level of power that was previously hidden. My eyes glowed with a terrifying red target pattern. I was entering a berserker state where my instinct took over, and my presence became genuinely scary. A massive, dark demonic shadow erupted from me, towering over the forest. I roared for us to enjoy this more, my aura turning from cool blue to a hellish, shadowy red. Faye was paralyzed with fear, staring up at the monster I had become. She gasped, her previously fiery spirit being completely snuffed out by my killing intent. My demonic aura screamed, a terrifying roar echoing through the clearing. This wasn't a student anymore. It was a force of nature that was about to end the game. I could see the pure terror reflected in Faye's eye. She realized too late that she's been poking a sleeping dragon, and now there was no way out. I delivered a punch that looked like it had a monster's claws attached to it. Faye was frozen, her internal monologue crying out that her body won't move as the strike connected. With a massive boom, Faye was sent flying backward with a massive impact, her body skidding across the ground like a skipped stone. I had officially ended the duel in the most brutal way possible. Principal Smith sensed the shift in atmosphere. He muttered about what just happened, his eye twitching as he realized I just tapped into a power that definitely isn't taught in any academy. Faye and I were left separated by a massive distance in the middle of the woods. The silence after that explosion was deafening, with the dust slowly settling over the scene. Faye was left crumpled on the ground, coughing and struggling to even lift her head. She was completely broken, both physically and mentally, by that last encounter. Two other examinees were watching from the bushes, and they looked like they'd just seen a ghost. They were witnessing the fall of an elite noble at the hands of a nobody. One noble whispered in frustration, to think a commoner would corner Faye. His face was pale and sweating. They were realizing that the rankings don't mean anything when you're facing a monster like me. One of the noble spectators, Brian, started having a full-on seizure. The residual aura from me was so heavy, it was literally breaking his mind just by being near it. Brian vomited on the ground, clutching a tree for support. His friend asked what's wrong, but he was too far gone to answer. The power gap was just that sickening. Brian stammered that he doesn't know, he just feels sick. He was experiencing pure, primal fear for the first time in his life, and it was completely overwhelming him. I stood in a field of red demonic energy, my silhouette looking like a lord of the underworld. Brian wondered if this sensation could be it. The real journey was only just beginning. Back in the noble camp, Sheath's lackeys were panicking. They shouted that the plan failed, and they never thought that Commoner would be so strong, realizing their secret ambush was a total disaster. One of the nobles had a chilling look in his eyes as he wiped blood from his lip. He muttered that, if that legend is true, implying there's something far more dangerous about me than just martial arts. The lackeys declared that they can't let me live, their aura turning dark and murderous. They were no longer playing a school game. This had turned into a legitimate assassination mission. The scene shifted back to Faye on the ground, looking up in pure terror. She was witnessing something she couldn't explain, her fiery spirit completely snuffed out by the darkness before her. A massive blast of red energy erupted as the demonic me struck. It was a level of violence that shouldn't be possible for a student, and Faye was right at the center of it. Faye was hit squarely, coughing up blood as she was launched away. Her face was a mask of pure agony and shock. She was a top-tier prodigy, and she just got treated like a toy. I descended from the sky like a fallen angel, my glowing red eyes locked on my prey. Faye was literally tumbling through the air, completely unable to control her movement. I let out a primal roar, my body wreathed in a terrifying red aura. I had completely lost myself to my berserker state, and I looked like I was ready to tear the whole forest apart. Massive pillars of dark energy erupted from the ground as I unleashed my power. It was a display of raw destruction that made every other candidate in the forest look like an amateur. Faye was struggling to pick herself up, her armor shattered and her body failing her. She realized there's no way she could win against this, finally understanding the terrifying reality of my strength. A giant fist of red aura loomed over Fei, looking like the hand of a demon. I was about to deliver a finishing blow that would be lethal for any normal person. Fei looked up at the incoming strike, her eyes wide with the realization that this was the end. She thought that at this rate, her voice lost in the roaring wind of my aura. Fei was internally screaming, realizing that at this rate, she was actually going to get killed by this commoner. The sheer killing intent coming off me was unlike anything she'd ever felt. In a moment of pure desperation, Fei called out, "Martial Arcane." She was forced to break her own rule and use magic just to survive this encounter. What happened next was hard for her to believe. She unleashed a massive blaze fist, a column of fire erupting into the sky as she tried to blow me back. It was an all-or-nothing move to reclaim her dominance. The collision of our powers was absolutely catastrophic, a storm of red and gold energy tearing through the clearing. The ground was literally melting under the heat of Fei's desperation. A massive explosion followed, and Fei was sent flying with a pained cry as the blast cleared the area. It looked like her trump card wasn't enough to stop my momentum. She crashed through the trees and slammed into the ground, creating a crater. The impact was so heavy, you could almost hear her armor buckling under the force. I landed smoothly, the dust and debris swirling around me like a cape. I was completely unfazed, which was honestly the scariest part about this whole fight. I stared at my hands. My pupils dilated as I gasped for air. I muttered to myself about what just happened again, sensing that demonic power slipping away as I regained control. Smoke and steam rose from my body as my aura stabilized. I thought to myself, so this is magic, finally realizing the true nature of the power I just encountered. Kain rushed over, looking totally panicked as he checked on me. I told him I was fine, but my gaze immediately shifted over to where Fei landed. Suddenly, a proctor appeared out of nowhere, standing over me. He coldly announced that because my emblem was destroyed in the blast, I was officially disqualified. A noble student pointed his finger and yelled that I was disqualified. They were absolutely loving this, thrilled to see the commoner who humiliated them get kicked out on a technicality. I looked down at my shoulder where my emblem used to be, seeing only burnt remnants. I processed the news, but I didn't look nearly as upset as I should be. A close-up showed the emblem caught in a lingering magical flame. It was completely charred, which, according to the rules, was the end of the line for my exam. Kain tried to argue with the proctors, shouting that it was an accident and they should wait. But the nobles were already celebrating, telling him to shut up because a loss is a loss. The noble archer smirked, accusing Kain of trying to help a commoner cheat. He was really leaning into the class divide, making sure everyone knew I didn't belong here. The noble continued to gloat, standing tall while Kain and I stayed grounded. He sneered that trash should disappear already, thinking he's finally won the day. Suddenly, a voice cut through the tension. Fei Durahan was back on her feet, bleeding from her mouth but looking more serious than ever as she shouted for them to hold on, and this decision would change everything. The noble and Kain both turned around in shock, not expecting Fei to interfere. She looked absolutely ragged after that hit, but her presence was still undeniable. I looked back over my shoulder at her, my expression neutral. Fei stared at me, her first words being a whispered question if I was safe. She seemed genuinely worried for a second. Fei walked toward us, steam still coming off her armor as she regained her composure. The proctor and the nobles were confused, wondering why she was stepping in now. The noble leader glared at her, asking if she was really trying to protect a commoner. He warned her that she was risking disqualification herself for breaking the rules to save me. Fei just told him to shut up with a look that would make most people run for the hills. She admitted she knew my emblem burned, but she wasn't letting the story end there. In a shocking twist, Fei actually apologized to me, admitting she accidentally used magic because she was pushed to her limit. Kain was completely floored. The high and mighty Fei Durahan was actually saying sorry. Fei tried to play it off as no big deal, telling me it's totally fine. She even challenged me to another match once we were both enrolled, showing she's got a true warrior spirit. The noble leader was still skeptical, waving his hand as if Fei was crazy. He reminded them that we only had 4 emblems. How does that translate into getting enrolled? Fei didn't say a word. She just pulled out a cloth with a confident look. She started unrolling it with a soft sound, revealing she'd been busy behind the scenes. Fei handed over a massive stack of emblems to me, calling it my reward for beating her. I was genuinely surprised by the gesture. She was literally giving me the win. I looked at the pile of 10 emblems in my hand. This was more than enough to qualify me for the top 10 rankings. Fei just did me the biggest solid of my life. Fei gave the seething noble a smug look, asking if this counted as a valid record now. The noble was practically vibrating with rage, screaming her name as his plan went up in smoke. Fei addressed Kain as pretty boy, which he was definitely not happy about. Kain and I listened as Fei started explaining her reasoning for helping me. She looked down at a broken training sword and declared that she won't accept weak people passing while those who deserve it fail. She might be a noble, but she respects strength above all else. But fate had other plans. With a sharp kick, Fray sent her broken spear shaft into the air. She was already moving on from the loss and looking for the next challenge. Fray caught the spear with a smirk, but Kain was still worried. He asked what happens to me if the 10th place person ends up with way more than 10 emblems. Kain drew his sword, a sharp grin on his face as he said, "What a coincidence." He was thinking the same thing. It seemed he and Fray had finally found some common ground. The two of them crouched down, ready to hunt. Fray shouted for them to hurry. She needed to collect emblems again, and they both blasted off into the forest, leaving me to catch my breath. I stood alone in the quiet of the forest as my friends headed off. But the peace didn't last long. Someone was watching me from the shadows of the trees. A proctor walked up to me and officially declared me disqualified for losing my emblem. He offered to escort me out, and I simply replied with a tired, "Understood." I walked away with the proctor, my head down. From the bushes, the noble scumbags watched us go with sinister grins, whispering that they shouldn't think this is over. One of the lackeys was seething, his fist clenched tight. He growled that he never wants to see that guy's face again, his ego still bruised from the earlier beatdown. The noble leader, Sheath, had a murderous glint in his eye. He suggested that if an examinee happens to die in an accident during the exam, nobody would find it strange at all. The lackeys were all for it, egging him on to do it. They were hoping I wasn't like those weaklings, as they prepared for a straight-up murder attempt under the cover of night. A pair of glowing yellow eyes stared out from a demonic silhouette. This was the sensation people were feeling earlier. The true, hidden identity of Louis Carril is something much darker than a commoner. Principal Smith was walking through the academy halls with me. He noted that while martial arts are strong, that alone can't match magic. He was clearly trying to guide my potential. I stared up at the academy spires under the sunset. I was dreaming of learning how to fuse magic and martial arts to become something truly unstoppable in this world. Fast forward to the middle of the night. I was walking through the dark forest, my boot stepping in a puddle with a soft splash. I looked like I was on my way home after a long day. I looked down at my clothes and sighed. This is bad, my clothes are torn to shreds. I was more worried about explaining my appearance to my mom than I was about the life or death exam, and that's when everything changed. I was sweating, imagining my mom's reaction. I worried that if I told her the truth, she'd worry and ask all kinds of questions. For a demonic martial arts genius, I'm still just a kid who doesn't want to get in trouble. Suddenly, a masked assassin leaped at me from behind. This is tough. My instincts immediately flared up as I sensed the ambush. I saw a hand gripping a sword hilt and unsheathing it with a sharp sound. The speed of the draw was impressive. These were high-level professional killers. With a massive boom, I was blown back by a huge force, skidding through the dirt. The assassins were not holding back, using explosive power to try and end the fight before it even began. The lead masked assassin slid back, his eyes glowing red through his hood. He asked how I noticed, shocked that a 13-year-old kid could react to a professional sneak attack. I wiped some dust from my face with a cool look. I answered that it was the smell of blood, and you can't hide it. I was completely relaxed, which was absolutely terrifying for my attackers. 3 masked assassins surrounded me in a triangle formation. The leader mocked me, saying I was awfully relaxed for someone about to die, as they prepared for a coordinated strike. I stood my ground as the assassins circled me. I realized these opponents were fairly skilled, and I had to go all out, my blue aura beginning to hum with power. I zeroed in on one specific figure in the background. I thought that, especially that guy looks pretty dangerous, realizing I was facing a team that actually knew what they were doing. A sword slash came whistling from behind, but I wove around it effortlessly. The assassin yelled at the brat not to look away, but he was hitting nothing but air. The lead assassin lunged with a massive, glowing blade, screaming that my head would fly off. This was the ultimate test. Would I survive this assassination attempt? The fight was about to be continued. I must have looked absolutely unhinged right then, with blood dripping down my face and those glowing blue eyes locked on my targets. I was reaching a level of focus that was honestly terrifying. The assassins were lunging from every direction, but I was moving like a ghost through a blizzard of blades. I wasn't just dodging, I was reading their every move before they even made it. Talk about a power move. I literally caught a sword strike with my bare hands. Blue energy sparks flew as I shut down the assassin's attack without breaking a sweat. One assassin got a face full of dirt as I slammed him into the ground with a devastating impact. I wasn't pulling any punches anymore. I delivered a high-speed kick to another attacker, sending him flying backward with a shockwave. I was treating these professionals like absolute amateurs. The battle was just a blur of movement now as I cleared out the mooks. I was moving with so much speed that they couldn't even keep track of where the next hit was coming from. The lead assassin finally spoke up, admitting that I had superhuman perception and advanced techniques. He realized way too late that the intel they had was actually accurate for once. I paused, looking back at the leader with a bloodied face. I was confused by the mention of intel, realizing this wasn't just a random encounter. The leader stood tall while 3 crossbowmen lined up behind him. He admitted my hand-to-hand combat was apprentice level but smugly asked, "But what about magic?" Suddenly, the crossbowmen fired 3 glowing green wind arrows simultaneously. They were moving with incredible speed, aiming to pin me down where I stood. I was forced into a defensive stance, crossing my arms to block the magical barrage. I let out a shocked sound as the pressure of the wind magic hit me. The wind arrows missed and carved massive holes into the trees behind me, showing just how lethal they were. I gritted my teeth, realizing I was dealing with wind arrows again. I took a deep breath, deciding it was time for a breathing technique. I knew I couldn't keep defending forever without boosting my own physical stats, but things were about to get worse. I felt an internal view of my ki pathways lighting up as I focused my internal energy. I was unleashing my latent abilities to explosively increase my speed and strength. In a flash of blue aura, I lunged forward like a human missile. I was going all in on power and speed, aiming to end this before they could reload. The assassins tried to fire again, but I said it was pointless struggling. I was already moving way too fast for their aim to catch up. The wind arrows crossed paths in the air, hitting nothing but empty space. I had completely vanished from their line of sight in the blink of an eye. One of the assassins was totally lost, looking around frantically. He stammered that I was fast, and wondered where I went, having no idea that I was already right on top of him. Surprise! I appeared directly above the assassin, planting my hand on the guy's head to use him as a springboard. I got a close-up of the assassin's eyes through his mask, and I could see the exact moment he realized he messed up. He was paralyzed with pure terror. I slammed the guy headfirst into the dirt with a sickening crack. The assassin let out a final cry as he was taken out of the fight permanently. The other 2 crossbowmen tried to pin me down with more green energy slashes. I was just a blur, leaving motion lines as I danced between the projectiles. The lead assassin was starting to lose his cool, screaming for his men to stop me as he watched his team get dismantled one by one. I delivered a brutal overhead kick to another masked ninja. I was being completely relentless, showing zero mercy to these hitmen. A massive impact sent the assassin crashing into the ground. I was systematically wiping the floor with everyone in my path. I stopped for a second, sparks of electricity crackling off my skin as I gasped for air. Using this much chi was clearly taking a toll on my young body. I skidded across the clearing, my boots carving ruts into the ground. I was trying to catch my breath, but the final boss was finally making his move. I narrowed my eyes at the leader, thinking that this guy is strong. I could tell that the guy in the blue scarf was on a completely different level than the others. Little did I know what was coming next. The lead assassin stood there with his arms crossed, looking totally unimpressed. He was radiating a dangerous aura while his long blue scarf drifted in the wind. In a flash, the leader appeared right behind me with a rush of sound. I was completely caught off guard, my eyes wide as I realized I'd been outspeeded. I realized I was surrounded again, but this time it was by the leader's clones or high-speed movements. I was back in the danger zone. I wove through a flurry of green energy slashes that were flying with incredible speed. It was getting harder and harder for me to find a safe spot to stand. From a high angle, I saw I was trapped in a star-shaped formation of attackers. They were all closing in at once, looking for the finishing blow. I was finally knocked down, skidding across the grass. The assassin with the massive hammer stood over me, smugly saying I finally went down. The hammer wielder raised his glowing purple weapon, asking if I was really just a commoner. He thought he had the win secured, but he was making a big mistake by talking. Things just got real. My eye turned a dark, glowing purple with a target pattern. The beast was waking up, and the assassin had no idea what was coming. With a sharp crack, I caught the massive wooden handle of the hammer with my bare hands. I was staring back with those terrifying eyes, completely ignoring the pain. I shoved the weapon back with a heavy thud, catching the assassin off guard. I wasn't just surviving, I was taking control of the momentum again. With another crunch, I delivered a strike so precise, it looked like I was aiming for the guy's vertebrae. The assassin's eyes were wide with shock as he felt the impact. I delivered a lethal-looking strike that resulted in a huge spray of blood across the screen. I was officially done playing games with these guys. In a blur of green and white light, I zipped through the remaining enemies. I was like a whirlwind of destruction, leaving nothing but chaos in my wake. The lead assassin looked down at me, lying in a pool of blood. He mockingly asked if I was playing dead, thinking he'd finally finished the job. I slowly stood up amidst the bodies of the fallen assassins, blood spraying everywhere with a sickening splash. I must have looked like a monster rising from the grave. The leader started clapping, calling it impressive for someone so young. He had this casual, sociopathic vibe that made the whole scene even creepier. I asked him if he even cared that his underlings were killed. The leader just walked forward coldly, saying he couldn't care less what happens to trash. I didn't waste any more words and lunged at the leader again. I was putting every last ounce of my remaining strength into this final assault, and that's when everything changed. The assassin easily dodged, telling me that I was pretty smart. He was clearly enjoying the fact that I was actually putting up a fight. He revealed that he's only here because of that person's orders, as a massive vortex of purple energy started swirling around him. The real fight was just beginning. The leader pulled out his own massive purple hammer, declaring that he'd want to make me his disciple if the circumstances were different. He was radiating pure, high-level power now. He slammed the hammer down with a massive impact that shattered the earth. I was caught right in the middle of the massive shockwave. A giant vertical pillar of dark energy erupted into the sky with a roaring sound. The power output was so insane that it was literally clearing the forest. I was sent flying through the air like a ragdoll, letting out a pained cry as I was caught in the blast. This was the first time I'd truly looked outmatched. I saw myself tumbling through the trees, unable to regain my footing. The leader was proving that there's a massive gap between us. The assassin told me my ability might exceed an apprentice, but against a higher-ranked fighter, I didn't stand a chance. He was standing there looking like a purple-eyed demon. A close-up on the leader's eyes, which were glowing with a menacing purple light. He whispered that it didn't even come close as he prepared for his next strike. With a massive explosion, he struck again with a huge purple energy slash. The impact was so strong it looked like it was tearing a hole in reality. Another massive vertical explosion of light and debris rocked the forest. It was hard to imagine anyone surviving a direct hit from that much raw power. The leader charged forward through the smoke, his purple energy flaring wildly behind him. He wasn't letting up for even a single second. More shockwaves and heavy impacts shook the ground. The scale of this fight was reaching a point where it was almost impossible for me to keep up. A massive cloud of dust and smoke covered the entire area as the leader finished his assault. Everything was silent for a moment, and it looked like it was all over. The leader paused, breathing hard as he stared into the smoke. He muttered to himself about this guy, realizing that he hadn't felt the killing blow land just yet. The dust started to settle, showing a massive, shattered crater where I was standing. The trees had been completely leveled by the sheer force of the magic. The assassin asked in disbelief if I was still alive. I was standing in the middle of the wreckage, looking like I just crawled out of hell, but fate had other plans. I was covered in blood and burns, but I was still standing. I gripped my training weapon, whispering that I won't die here with pure, unyielding determination. The leader got a serious look, saying, "It's too bad, my life ends here." He was done underestimating me and was ready to finish it properly. He raised the glowing purple hammer one last time, declaring that not even a goddess can save me now. The energy building up was more intense than anything we've seen so far. I suddenly remembered my past life and my celestial hammer research. I realized I could use martial arcane to fuse my physical skill with magical power. The assassin slammed his hammer down, creating a massive crater, but I was gone. I was tapping into a power I'd never used before to dodge the undodgeable. I was bleeding from my mouth, thinking that I absolutely cannot die. I was pushing my body past the breaking point for the sake of my goals. I thought about how I wanted to master magic and protect my precious family. That was my core motivation, and it was fueling my sudden power spike. I saw a quick flashback of my mom and the kids at the orphanage. I screamed in my head that I wanted to change my fate and break the cycle of abandonment. My eyes were now fully red and glowing with that target pattern. I declared that no matter what price I had to pay, I would survive. A massive, swirling red energy sphere started forming around me. The roaring sound meant something huge was about to explode from within me. A giant pillar of red and white light shot into the air as I unleashed my new power. The leader was stunned, shouting in disbelief as he was caught in the backdraft. The explosion was massive, lighting up the night sky and burning away the forest for miles. This was some next-level power that definitely wasn't in the intel. I was lying face down in the smoking crater, coughing up blood. I gave everything I had for that one strike, and now I was barely clinging to consciousness. The forest was still burning as I continued to cough on the ground. I was a total mess, but I was somehow still breathing. The lead assassin stood over me, still holding his hammer. He looked confused, admitting to himself how strange it was as he looked at the broken kid on the ground. The leader realized that for a moment, it felt like he was fighting an equal. He was finally acknowledging me as a legitimate threat, not just a talented kid. He stared at me with a look of realization, seeing the monster hidden inside. He said that power is why that person is targeting me. The assassin raised his hammer for a final, lethal blow. He roared for the monster to die as he prepared to end me once and for all. This was it, no more chances. A massive vortex of wind magic erupted, spinning with so much force it literally launched a masked assassin into the air. This wasn't just a breeze, it was a full-on hurricane designed to clear out the riffraff. I stood in the center of the clearing as another attacker got caught in the gale, looking like a leaf in a storm. The power scaling in this fight just went through the roof in a matter of seconds. The wind magic continued to howl, tossing the assassins around like they were nothing. It was an absolute spectacle of arcane dominance that had everyone left standing completely paralyzed. One of the masked mooks was absolutely sweating buckets, staring into the storm in pure disbelief. He screamed, wondering what that was, realizing he was way out of his league. A giant funnel of teal energy pierced the night sky, looking like a pillar of light from the heavens. The sheer scale of this spell was enough to level the entire forest. The wind slammed down with a sharp sound, followed by a sinister voice echoing through the chaos. Someone bellowed that this is only the beginning, and I knew things were about to get real. I was left standing in the aftermath, looking up with a confused and bloodied face. I was wondering what just happened and where that massive surge of power came from. The dust cleared to reveal the man himself, Principal Smith. He arrived in a flash of light, looking cool, calm, and absolutely terrifyingly powerful. I was barely hanging on, my eyes widening as I recognized my savior. I gasped out the principal's title, realizing that the top dog of the academy just stepped in to save my hide. Smith noted that I managed to suppress my rampage for now, which was a cryptic but major hint at my hidden power. He handed over a glowing green magic potion and told me to drink up. I didn't hesitate, chugging the glowing liquid as Smith watched me with a sharp, calculating gaze. This kid has definitely caught the interest of the strongest person around. Meanwhile, the lead assassin hit the dirt with a heavy thud, looking like a pile of laundry. It was a pretty embarrassing end for someone who was acting like a final boss 5 minutes ago. Principal Smith looked genuinely livid, his aura flaring as he stood over the defeated hitmen. He growled about them attacking an examinee of his academy, and I could tell he was about to make someone regret their life choices. And this was just the beginning. He stared down at the leader, demanding to know who ordered this hit. He wasn't playing games anymore. He wanted names, and he wanted them now. The assassin was coughing up blood, trembling on the ground. He mockingly called Smith a Grand Master and warned him that he can't protect that monster forever. Smith's purple eyes narrowed, and the temperature in the room just dropped about 20 degrees. He doesn't like being talked back to, especially by someone he just flattened. A demonic red visage appeared in the background, a terrifying reminder of the monster the assassin mentioned. The shadow roared that this is only the beginning, setting up some serious future drama. Suddenly, a massive burst of blood and energy erupted as the assassin was finished off. Smith stood by calmly, showing zero mercy to those who threatened his school students. Smith looked at the remains, questioning if it was a suicide or if the Assassin's Guild was behind this. He was already putting the pieces together like a detective in a fantasy world. I stood back up, glowing with a soft green light as the potion took effect. I was amazed by the speed of the advanced healing potion, looking like I just stepped out of a spa instead of a war zone. I clenched my fists, testing my strength with a look of pure shock. I thought to myself that even my fractured bones are completely healed, realizing the level of resources the principal has access to. I finally addressed Smith, asking if he just happened to pass by or if this was intentional. I'm a sharp kid, and I know there are no coincidences with guys this powerful. I looked up at my savior, demanding to know why he always saves me. Smith just stared back, keeping his cards close to his chest for now. Smith gave a vague answer, saying he'll discuss that at my home. I immediately had a mini heart attack, screaming in my head at the thought of the principal meeting my mom. I went into full chibi panic mode, clutching my head and realizing it's gotten way too late. I was more scared of my mom's lecture than I was of the assassins. I took off running, yelling that this is bad, so bad, while leaving the most powerful man in the Empire just standing there in the middle of a corpse-filled forest. Smith didn't mind though. He called out for Kylie and ordered a cleanup crew to take care of the mess. He's a busy man, and he's got people for that. A dark, snake-like shadow familiar slithered through the clearing, systematically erasing any evidence of the battle. Talk about having a convenient disposal service, but things were about to get worse. The scene shifted to the town of Mantia under a beautiful full moon. Everything looked peaceful, but I knew some drama was already brewing at the local orphanage. A group of arrogant nobles was harassing my mother, Laciella. One of them barked, asking who said she could repair that weird millstone, looking for any reason to squeeze more taxes out of them. The lead noble jerk leaned in, calling her a liar and saying she needed some punishment. He was a total scumbag who thought he could do whatever he wanted because the church backed him up. With a loud whack, a foot came out of nowhere and connected perfectly with the noble's jaw. It was a high-speed kick delivered with a satisfying smack that was extremely satisfying to deliver. I was back. I drop-kicked the noble across the town square, sending him flying with a pained cry, while my mom looked on in complete shock. I landed smoothly in a combat stance while the noble skidded through the dirt. Laciella cried out that I was finally home, her relief being cut short by the sheer violence she just witnessed. I immediately turned back into a concerned son, asking if my mom was okay. I had that don't mess with my family energy that is just pure fire. I stared down the noble, looking ready to go another round. The jerk scrambled to his feet, probably realizing that the brat he was making fun of is actually a lethal weapon. Laciella saw my state and gasped, asking what happened. My clothes were torn and there was blood. She was going into full mom panic mode, and I was desperately trying to think of a cover story. I lied through my teeth, telling her not to worry, claiming my clothes just got caught on a tree during the exam. Laciella gave me a skeptical look while Smith's boots were seen approaching. The noble jerk pointed an angry finger, yelling that it's me again, always breaking the rules. This guy clearly has zero self-preservation instincts if he's still talking trash. He threatened to report me to the Lord and even asked if he should call Fighter George back for another round. This dude was begging for another kick to the face. Suddenly, Principal Smith literally floated down from the sky like a majestic bird. He said calmly that it seems there's a misunderstanding, and I could practically see the noble souls leaving their bodies. Smith stood beside me, introducing himself as the principal of Candria Arcanist Academy, Aronian. He was dropping a tactical nuke on these small-town bullies. The nobles were shaking like leaves, stuttering about how he's a real Grand Master because he was literally flying. Their arrogant attitude just vanished faster than their tax money. Smith gave them a cold, glowing stare and told them to give his regards to the Lord. He was essentially telling them to run away before he decided to do something more permanent. The bullies bowed so low they almost hit the ground, screaming their agreement as they scrambled away in absolute terror. That's what happens when you bring a high-level boss to a low-level, griefing fight. Smith turned to Laciella with a much softer tone, recognizing her as my mother. He asked to discuss something important, and I knew this was the conversation that was going to change everything. We moved inside the orphanage, where Laciella politely offered him a seat. The atmosphere was heavy with the weight of the secrets that were about to be revealed, and this decision would change everything. Smith stopped to examine the weird millstone the nobles were complaining about. He was fascinated that it moved automatically without magic, which was basically black magic to people in this world. He looked around the room, realizing that it's everywhere. There were little inventions and improvements scattered all over the house that defied conventional magical logic. The interior of the orphanage was shown, filled with cozy, well-designed furniture and gadgets. It was clear that I had used my past life knowledge to make our lives better. I was in the background, making some juice while Laciella explained that I made everything myself. She admitted she had no idea where I get these ideas, but she was clearly proud of her genius son. She beamed, saying that, thanks to me, their lives had become so much easier, gesturing to a table full of fresh fruit. It was a sweet moment, but Smith's gaze was turning increasingly serious. Laciella asked with a worried look if I caused any trouble during the exam. Smith just laughed and said, on the contrary, I showed results beyond imagination. Smith stared at the floor, thinking to himself about such talent while magical particles swirled around him. He was starting to see the world-changing potential hidden in this commoner kid. The scene transitioned to a historical legend about a time when humanity was under the tyrannical rule of monsters. One genius eventually emerged to lead them out of the dark. This hero was guided by a goddess, and we saw him slashing through a giant, shadowy beast with a sharp sound. This was some epic ancient history right here. Soldiers were shown celebrating Liberation Day atop a pile of monster corpses. This victory is what gave birth to the current Saint calendar and the peaceful world they live in today. In the Gaia scripture, this figure is known as the first hero. He's depicted as a powerful warrior who saved all of humanity from extinction. Laciella called him a true savior, but she noted that in folk legends, there's no mention of a hero who specifically saved humanity this way. The truth has been obscured over time. Principal Smith got a mysterious look, leaning in to reveal a bombshell. He said no, the hero appears in a different form. He was about to drop some classified knowledge. He revealed that the hero was a man with black hair and black eyes. This was massive because I share these exact features under my dye. Smith warned us that this is a great secret, known only to the highest echelons of human society. He was telling us we were part of a dangerous, hidden legacy, but fate had other plans. He emphasized that it's known only to humanity's upper echelons as he took a deep breath. The weight of this information was clearly crushing the peaceful atmosphere of the room. He explained that while the hero saved humanity, madness dwelled within his heart. We saw a dark vision of the hero screaming to kill them all as he succumbed to a bloodthirsty rage. A gruesome shot of a massacre followed, showing the true cost of the hero's descent into insanity. He became the very monster he was meant to destroy. Because of this rampage, he was erased from human history and bound by red, glowing chains. They didn't just kill him, they made sure the world forgot he ever existed. I saw a demonic eye peering through a mask, symbolizing the inner madness, just like a curse. This was the burden I was carrying, whether I knew it or not. I stared at my shaking hands, wondering if my earlier outburst was from that time. I was starting to connect my own dark urges to the legend of the fallen hero. Kain Oranka was mentioned as being part of the reason why every country has a policy for finding people with black hair and black eyes. They're not looking for heroes, they're looking for threats to exterminate. Smith gave me a soft pat on the head, asking if I really thought I could keep fooling everyone with just hair dye. He's known the truth from the very first day. Laciella got incredibly defensive, crying out that it was her idea to dye my hair. She begged Smith not to hurt me, saying this child is truly a good boy, while tears welled up in her eyes. I placed a hand on my mom's shoulder, telling her it's okay. I was remarkably calm for someone who just found out he's public enemy number one. I reasoned that if the principal wanted to kill me, he would have done it already. I knew Smith wouldn't come to our home just to execute us. There was a much bigger reason. Smith smiled, calling me remarkably wise for a 13-year-old boy. He admitted he saw the qualities of a new hero, because I managed to tame the inner madness instead of being consumed by it. I was absolutely stunned, whispering about a new hero. I never imagined that my curse could actually be seen as something noble or hopeful. Smith flicked a red apple into the air, noting that this world may seem peaceful, but beneath the surface, something is lurking. He was using a simple fruit to explain some heavy philosophical concepts. He continued that great darkness constantly lurks, catching the apple with one hand. He admitted that after watching me today, his perspective has shifted entirely. He held the apple up against the moonlight, muttering that legends are absurd. He had decided to bet on reality and on me instead of old scriptures and fear. Smith looked me dead in the eye, declaring that he wants to guide me in the right direction for humanity's future. He was officially offering to be my mentor and protector, and that's when everything changed. With a sharp whoosh, Smith tossed the apple back to me. It was a literal and symbolic passing of the torch, or in this case, the snack. I caught it with both hands, staring at it with a mix of wonder and determination. I had just been given a chance at a life I never thought possible. Smith mentioned that thanks to Fray and Kain's efforts, most examinees failed the final test. He had this smug look that said he planned this outcome from the very start. He delivered the news we'd been waiting for. In other words, I passed. My mom and I were frozen in shock, finally hearing the words that change our lives forever. And then came the ultimate offer. He asked if, at Candria Arcanist Academy, I would like to receive his personal instruction. Being the personal student of a Grand Master, that's like a cheat code for life. I took a big bite out of the apple, asking with a sharp grin if Smith was betting on me, and what would happen if someday I went berserk. I was showing some serious spine by questioning my new mentor's motives. A close-up of Smith's purple eye flashed with a sharp glint. He was making a silent promise that he was prepared for whatever happens next. I looked down at the half-eaten apple, my bloodied face lit by the moon. I had made my choice, and there was no turning back now from this path of destiny. Smith stood by the window, the moonlight silhouetting his powerful figure. He mused about what would happen then, leaving us with a chilling cliffhanger as the first chapter came to a close. What a wild ride. One of my brothers from the orphanage was totally losing it after hearing the news. He couldn't believe I actually got a personal invitation from the principal himself. The guy started listing off all the expenses like tuition, uniforms, and dorm fees. I just looked on, probably realizing that being a prodigy is actually pretty expensive. I had a flashback to the legendary hero with the black hair and eyes. I was starting to wonder what kind of crazy connection I actually had to that dark past. I remembered Principal Smith touching my head and calling me out on the hair dye. It was a chilling reminder that the most powerful man in the school has known my secret from the start. Smith looked absolutely menacing in that shot, his eyes glowing with a cold purple light. I was internally questioning how much I could really trust this guy, especially with an "I will kill you" vibe hanging in the air. The two of us were walking through the dark forest at night. I was genuinely worried about why the principal let my mom hear everything earlier, fearing the stress it'll put on her. I snapped back, looking totally insulted. I made it clear that my mom is definitely not a burden, despite what anyone else might think. Smith didn't back down, pointing out that my true identity being exposed puts my entire family in danger. He said a mother should understand the weight of the situation to some extent. The principal walked off into the wind, leaving me with a heavy final warning. If I wanted to survive what's coming, I needed to get a lot stronger, and fast. I stared into the distance with pure determination burning in my eyes. I knew the principal was right. My life was about to get a lot more complicated. Suddenly, little Lana came charging out of the woods, screaming my name. It was a complete 180 from the heavy conversation I just had. She leaped into my arms, nearly knocking me over with a giant hug. I caught her with a soft smile, clearly treasuring these moments of peace. Lana started tearing up, begging me to stay and saying she didn't want to say goodbye. It was a real heartbreaker of a moment that showed how much the kids rely on me. I gave her my best big brother smile, reassuring her that I'd be back during every break. I reminded her that no matter where I go, this orphanage is always my home, and this decision would change everything. We sealed the deal with a pinky promise under the soft moonlight. Lana still looked a bit worried, but she was trusting me to keep my word. A bit later, another boy ran up with some urgent news. Apparently, there was a noble's butler at the gate specifically asking for me. A wide shot showed a super fancy horse-drawn carriage parked right outside our humble orphanage. The butler looked like he stepped straight out of a high-class mansion. The butler bowed respectfully, handing over a formal letter. He introduced himself as a representative of the Oranka family. Yeah, Kain's family. I read the letter, finding out it was a personal invitation from Kain himself. The noble boy wanted to hang out and deepen our friendship before the school year officially kicked off. I kept it simple with an understood, and followed the butler to the carriage. I was taking the express route to high society. We got a look at the town of Harzan, a place that basically exists because of the Oranka family's wealth. It was massive, clean, and looked way more advanced than the town I grew up in. I walked through the manor, my boots clicking on the polished marble floors. Even just the entrance hall was probably bigger than my whole orphanage. I was absolutely stunned by the size of the Oranka mansion. It wasn't just a house, it was a literal castle, and it really drove home the gap between commoners and the elite. Kain came running down the hall with a huge wave, clearly stoked to see me. He was looking way more relaxed than he did during the exams. Kain grabbed me by the shoulder, laughing about the scene I caused during the final test. He was acting like we'd been best friends for years. We started walking through the mansion together. I humbly said I only passed because of him and Fray, but Kain wasn't having it. He knew I had the skill to pass on my own. Kain was still thinking about the fact that we never got to have a proper spar during the exam. He had that competitive fire, and he was ready for a rematch. The noble boy insisted we have plenty of matches before school starts. He was practically bouncing with energy while the maids in the background kept everything tidy. I just let out a tired sigh, looking totally exhausted by Kain's hyper energy. It was a classic chill guy versus hyper guy dynamic. The vibe shifted instantly when a stern noblewoman appeared at the top of the stairs. Kain froze up, and I was left wondering who this intimidating new person was. But things were about to get worse. It was Kain's mother, and she was looking down at us like we were dirt on her shoes. Her cold gaze was enough to stop anyone in their tracks. Kain tried to introduce me as his friend, but he was clearly nervous. He was stuttering through the explanation while I just stood there, keeping my cool. She shut him down instantly with one word: silence. Her expression was pure ice, and she looked absolutely disgusted that a commoner was standing in her house. Kain looked like he just got slapped, his face pale with shock and fear. He's never seen his mother this angry before. She started berating him from the top of the stairs, demanding to know when the Oranka family gates became open to just anyone. She made it clear that a man like me was nowhere near worthy of being his friend. She pulled out her fan and stared us down, telling Kain that associating with a commoner was a complete waste of time. She wanted him focused on training to become a sage, just like his father wanted. The mother stepped forward, the sound of her heels clicking on the stone echoing through the hall. She was being absolutely ruthless with her words. She towered over me, demanding to know my true purpose. She sneered, asking if it was money or power, assuming every commoner is just out for a payday. She pulled a gold ring off her finger, boasting that it's worth dozens of gold coins. She was treating me like a beggar who could be bought off with some shiny jewelry. With a dismissive flick, she threw the ring at my feet and told me to pick it up and leave. I stood there in shadow, my face hidden while the ring clattered on the floor. Kain finally snapped and shouted his mother's name in pure anger. He was horrified that she would humiliate his guests like this in their own home. He kept yelling, asking her why she would do something so cruel. I was still standing there silently, looking like I was processing the insult. Kain turned to me with a look of pure guilt, apologizing for his mother's behavior. He was clearly ashamed of his family right now. I actually knelt down to pick up the ring, but I wasn't doing it because I was greedy. I told the mother that I became friends with Kain because I recognized his potential as a warrior. I stood back up and stared her down, asking if Kain's word was really worth so little to her. Both Kain and his mother were caught off guard by my sudden confidence. Kain looked up at me with newfound respect. Even after being insulted, his friend me was standing up for the value of our bond. The mother was fuming now, her face twisted with rage. She screamed for someone to come and handle the situation, but fate had other plans. A bunch of guards and butlers rushed into the hall. She pointed at me and ordered them to throw this filthy commoner out of the manor immediately. Kain tried to block them, shouting that I was more talented than he was. He brought up how I broke all the records and even beat Fray in a straight fight. The mother just laughed it off, calling those claims ridiculous lies. She refused to believe a commoner could ever surpass elite noble children. I doubled down, stating that with me around, Kain could become even stronger than before. Kain looked at me, totally shocked by the vote of confidence. she shrieked, asking how much more I would mock the Oranka family, completely losing her noble composure. She was taking my confidence as a direct insult to their lineage. Her rage manifested as a terrifying red aura that filled the room. The guards were closing in on me, and it looked like things were about to get violent. Suddenly, the massive doors at the end of the hall burst open. A powerful figure stood in the doorway, and the whole room went dead silent. A bearded man with a look that meant business stood there. He repeated my words back to the room, asking if I definitely just said that. Kain and I were both frozen in place, eyes wide with shock. Even the mother looked like she's seen a ghost. The man entered the hall, and everyone bowed, calling him master. This was William Oranka, the head of the house and one of the most powerful men in the empire. The mother's arrogant attitude had completely vanished, replaced by pale, sweating fear. She stammered out his name, clearly terrified of her own husband. William walked past her without even a glance, heading straight for us kids. She tried to stop him, but he was already focused on me. He kept moving with a terrifyingly calm purpose. The red cape trailing behind him just added to the boss energy he was radiating. Kain bowed deeply, greeting his father with a shaky voice. I stood beside him, trying to keep my composure in front of such an overwhelming presence. I introduced myself as Kain's friend, but I was internally reeling. I sensed an aura coming off William that was on the same insane level as the principal. William looked down at his son with cold, shadowed eyes. He only said one word, Kain. It was enough to make anyone's heart skip a beat. He asked Kain if my words were actually true. Kain didn't hesitate, stating that at the very least, my combat ability exceeded his own, and this decision would change everything. William's eye flashed with a sharp blue light from the shadows. He commanded us to prove it, and the air in the room suddenly got a lot heavier. William Oranka, the head of the family, unleashed a massive, glowing red tiger aura. It towered over us, roaring with enough power to shake the entire mansion. I was sweating buckets now, feeling the weight of the most intense killing intent I'd ever experienced. I couldn't believe a human could radiate this much malice. The red tiger beast aura let out a primal roar that looked like it could rip someone apart. It was a terrifying display of raw, unfiltered power. William stood at the center of the storm, his eyes glowing like embers. I was barely holding my ground, bracing myself against the physical pressure of his aura. I gritted my teeth, my face pale as I realized the situation. This man wasn't just testing me, he was a monster in human form. William's red eyes were locked onto me, and the look in them was absolutely lethal. I was starting to realize that the head of the Oranka family doesn't do training matches. I was shaking with fear as the truth finally hit me. This man wasn't playing around. He seriously intended to end me right here and now. The words, "to kill me," flashed across my mind as I saw the killing intent peak. It was a total life or death moment in the middle of a noble's living room. Suddenly, there was a massive flash of red-white light as the attack connected. I was caught right in the center of the explosion. Was this it? Did I even survive that blow? I was reeling from the sheer pressure, feeling like my soul was being ripped right out of my body. That Oranka family willpower was no joke, and it was putting me through the ringer. That's when it hit me. I was dealing with a literal grandmaster. My eyes flared red as I prepared to dig deep and push back against this overwhelming presence. The aura around me turned into a raging inferno of orange energy. I'd spent years hunting monsters, so I'd built up a massive resistance to killing intent, and I wasn't about to buckle now. If it's just this level, I thought, standing firm as the flames danced around me. I was challenging the head of the house right back with a come-at-me attitude. I unleashed my own power in a massive explosion of light and fire. William stood there, completely dwarfed by the sheer magnitude of my energy. William Oranka looked legit, shocked, muttering a stunned, "What?" He definitely wasn't expecting this much kickback from a 13-year-old. The pressure intensified as a massive, glowing red dragon head manifested from the energy. I was staring death in the face, and I wasn't blinking. I was locked in. I could feel the target-like pattern glowing in my eye as I focused every ounce of my power to survive this test. A massive red tiger beast lunged through the flames at William. This wasn't a spar anymore. It was a full-on clash of Titan-level auras. A giant pillar of red and gold light erupted between the two of us, shaking the entire room. The sheer power being tossed around was probably cracking the mansion's foundation. Kain was screaming from the sidelines, looking absolutely terrified for me. He knew his dad didn't have a chill setting, and he was worried I just got vaporized. The dust finally started to settle as the energy dissipated. William stood there like a mountain, looking completely unbothered while the room was a total wreck. I was down on one knee, gasping for air and looking completely drained. William towered over me, looking down with a cold, analytical gaze. Kain rushed over to help me up, asking if I was okay. I managed a weak, "Yeah," but you could tell that encounter took everything I had. Little did he know what was coming next. William finally spoke, asking me why I seek strength. He wasn't angry, he seemed genuinely curious about what was driving this kid. I looked up, my gaze still sharp and full of fire. I might have been beaten, but my spirit was still very much intact. William closed his eyes, processing my determination. The silence in the hall was heavy as everyone waited for the head of the family's verdict. William turned to his son and told him his willpower was too weak. He ordered Kain to learn as much as he could from me, and Kain could only give a quiet yes. The noble mother was losing it, shouting William's name and asking what he was thinking. She was clearly horrified that her husband was acknowledging a commoner like this. William just gave her a cold side-eye and asked if she had an opinion. She immediately shut down with a shaky no, realizing she was way out of her depth. Kain and his mother shared a tense moment in the background while William stood firm. The family dynamic here was clearly complicated, to say the least. Kain decided to change the subject, telling me we should head to the training ground right away. I was all for it, happy to get away from the noble drama. We arrived at the Oranka family's private training ground, which was basically an entire forest clearing. Kain apologized for his parents' behavior, looking genuinely embarrassed. Kain admitted his father was a bit extreme, but I just shrugged it off. I told him there wasn't that much difference between us, so we shouldn't worry about the class stuff. Kain thought to himself that his father is a meritocrat who only cares about results. He felt that I was far more suited to be a son of the Oranka family than he was. I gave a small, knowing smile. I suggested that William testing my ability was actually his way of showing love. Kain looked at me like I was crazy. Kain stood under a tree, watching leaves fall as he repeated the word love. He's clearly never thought about his dad's brutality in that way before. I could see him reflecting on his life in his blue eye. He's been living under a shadow for a long time, and my words were starting to stir something in him, and this was just the beginning. I saw a flashback in his eyes. A young Kain training in the woods, looking determined as he faced off against a wild wolf. He's been fighting for his life since he was a toddler. Young Kain took a swing at a monster, his face full of grit. His father's only wish was to raise him into a great sage, just like his grandfather. Kain kept swinging his sword without even understanding why, just following orders. He was a child soldier in training, and it looked pretty lonely. All he really wanted was for his father to acknowledge him, but William always looked down on him with those cold, disappointed eyes. To Kain, the Oranka mansion was less like a home and more like a prison. Every breath he took felt like it required his father's permission. While the adults around him praised him as the young master, Kain felt like his status and talent were nothing but heavy chains binding him. The tighter they bound him, the more he yearned for the outside world. He dreamed of being a bard, singing freely and living his own life. He imagined himself as a bird flying across the continent, far away from his father's expectations. But unfortunately, reality was a lot harsher than his dreams. Back in the present, Kain caught a falling feather, a sad smile on his face. He was finally realizing that he couldn't just run away from his problems. Kain looked at his reflection in the training room window. He knew that in this world, only strength matters, and right now, he felt far too weak to be free. I was standing by the weapon rack, waiting for Kain to finish his inner monologue. We were about to get to work on some actual training. Kain grabbed a rapier, declaring that becoming strong was the only way to break his chains. He'd finally found his own motivation to fight. He wanted the permission to live freely, just like his father did as an academy graduate. He was ready to enter the academy and surpass everyone's expectations. Kain pointed his sword at me, a sharp look in his eye. He was counting on me to help him reach that next level, and I gave him a confident, yeah. We faced off, our expressions mirrors of each other's determination. This partnership was about to produce some insane results. I dropped into a fighting stance, ready to push Kain to his absolute limits. I wasn't going to hold back just because we were friends. We started sparring in the clearing, our movements becoming a blur of speed. William watched from a distance, hidden in the shadows of the mansion. William met with his head investigator to hear the results of the probe into my background. He wasn't taking any chances with this commoner kid. The butler guy adjusted his monocle, reporting that I was definitely not ordinary. He mentioned that I used mysterious combat techniques during the exam that no one had ever seen. He added that I didn't just break records. I even defeated Fray, who was using high-level magic. I was a literal anomaly, but things were about to get worse. The butler continued his report, looking genuinely intrigued by the findings. I was a puzzle that everyone wanted to solve. He revealed that Principal Aronian held me in high regard and even fought off assassins from the guild to protect me last night. The plot was definitely thickening. William watched the spar, noting that I was quite a troublemaker. He had this intense, analytical look that made me wonder what he was planning. The butler asked why William even permitted contact with Kain if I was such a high-risk factor. It was a fair question, considering how protective William usually is. William's philosophy was simple. Troublemakers attract danger, and when you challenge and overcome it, people grow. He was using me as a catalyst for Kain's development. In the spar, I delivered a massive high kick that connected with Kain's defense with a heavy impact. I was being absolutely relentless. William believed that if I was around, Kain might truly become stronger. He was betting on this commoner kid to be the spark his son needed. Kain recovered and spun his sword, unleashing a green whirlwind of energy. He shouted for me to take his technique, finally getting into the rhythm of the fight. I gave him a wicked smirk, telling him to come at me with full power. I was finally starting to see the potential in Kain that William was talking about. William stood with his arms crossed, admitting to himself that his son actually has a better eye for people than he does. That was a huge admission for a guy like him. Kain lunged with martial arcane, wind lunge, a spiral of green energy trailing behind him. He was moving faster than ever before. My eye glowed with a target pattern as I prepared to counter. I was reading Kain's magic like an open book. Kain was a blur of intensity as he closed the gap. He was putting everything he had into this one strike. With a massive boom, I blocked the entire attack with just my forearm, a huge shockwave erupting from the contact. I didn't even use magic to stop it. I gave him some pointers, saying the acceleration was good, but the movements were a bit too linear. I was teaching him even while I was kicking his butt. Kain was panting and sweating, totally shocked. He thought to himself that even though he used magic, I easily countered him, realizing the sheer gap in our technique. Kain finally got it. He smiled, realizing why even Fay couldn't beat me. It wasn't about raw power, it was about absolute technical mastery. I noticed the look on Kain's face and asked if there was something on my face. I was totally oblivious to how much of an inspiration I was becoming. I got serious, asking Kain if he's ever felt something off about his own fighting style. I was about to drop some major martial arts wisdom, and that's when everything changed. Kain was confused, scratching his head. He pointed out that his techniques are secret arts passed down through the Oranka family for generations. I countered that just because his ancestors mastered them doesn't mean they're the best way for him. I told him there's another path that he needs to find. I saw him picture a silhouette of William and another ancestor. He looked down, realizing that he's always just been a carbon copy of his father and grandfather. I stood by the weapons rack again, resting my sword on my shoulder. I was waiting for Kain to make a decision about his future. I asked with a smirk if he didn't want to surprise his father. That was the ultimate hook for a kid who's been desperate for approval his whole life. Suddenly, two high-level assassins leaped out of the trees, diving straight for William. The training session just turned into a real assassination attempt, ending on a massive cliffhanger. I broke down the philosophy of combat, explaining that in martial arts, speed is the ultimate weapon. I was standing there holding a dagger, looking like I was about to drop some serious knowledge. I went on to say that speed isn't just about how fast you move your feet. It's about your reaction time and how quickly you can make a decision when things get intense. I pointed out that Kain's natural speed is already top tier. When you pair that with his wind attribute magic, he has the potential to be a literal blur on the battlefield. Kain looked a bit surprised by my analysis as I showed him a sword wreathed in green wind energy. It was all about finding that perfect synergy between magic and movement. I told Kain that just because his grandfather mastered the family techniques doesn't mean they're the only way for him. I thought that his father might have hit a wall at Grandmaster because he didn't realize this. To really maximize his talent, I suggested that Kain needed to pivot to a more specialized combat style. I asked him straight up if he was prepared to change everything he knows. I dropped into a dual dagger stance, looking incredibly sharp. I was pushing him to stop being a pampered noble and start being a true warrior. Kain gripped his dagger tight, his expression full of resolve. He declared that he'll do absolutely anything if it means finally being free from his father's shadow. I told him, well said, and continued the lesson. I explained that the key to this style is constant movement and knowing exactly when to retreat to set up the next strike. We shared a confident grin, ready to put this theory into practice. I said, let's show your father what you can really do, and I knew things were about to get hype. The training session kicked off and it was 0 to 100 instantly. Two professional attackers leaped at William from the trees, but he just stood there like a mountain. Kain and I launched our own coordinated assault, leaping into the fray together. We shouted, "Accelerate," using wind magic to boost our opening move. A massive streak of teal energy cut across the training ground. We were moving so fast we were practically teleporting toward the head of the Oranka family. William reacted instantly, his cape fluttering as he blocked a strike from one of the masked guards. Even catching him by surprise seemed like an impossible task, but things were about to get worse. Kain lunged in with a dagger, his weapon glowing with wind energy as he tried to pierce his father's defense. He was showing more aggression now than he did in the entire entrance exam. We landed and immediately slid into our next positions with a sharp sound. Our coordination was actually getting pretty scary for a couple of kids. I explained the logic behind the change. Daggers are the fastest and most maneuverable weapons available. They're perfect for someone with Kain's high-speed stats. I told him we needed to draw out our advantages to the absolute limit. I had this intense, focused look that meant I was calculating about 100 different variables at once. I used my martial arts butterfly step, becoming a blur surrounded by glowing spectral butterflies as I danced around William's line of sight. William actually let out an interested sound as he watched my footwork. It takes a lot to impress this guy, but my technical mastery was doing the trick. I created multiple after images around William, aiming for maximum attack power in the smallest possible space. It was an overwhelming display of pure speed. Kain used his wind magic to launch into an aerial strike from above. He was taking my advice to heart and staying constantly on the move. The combined assault from my ground-level feints and Kain's diving strike put William in a pincer maneuver. We were actually making a grandmaster sweat. Kain was feeling the flow, thinking about how incredibly light his body felt right now. This new style was fitting him like a glove. He visualized himself as a bird soaring through the sky, finally free of the heavy chains that were holding him back. This wasn't just a fight for him, it was a breakthrough. Kain landed a strike, his aura glowing a brilliant green. He was successfully fusing his dagger techniques, combat training, and wind magic into one seamless style. That glowing blade was a sight to see. Kain was surely finding his own path now, one that was entirely separate from his father's expectations. William stared at his son, his face shadowed but his eye glowing with a sharp purple light. He was witnessing a transformation he never thought possible. William muttered in disbelief, his composure finally cracking just a little bit. He was seeing a version of Kain that actually had the potential to surpass him, and this was just the beginning. Kain roared that this was his martial way as he charged back in, a trail of teal light following every movement. The kid had officially found his groove. William just let out a cold huff, refusing to admit he was impressed just yet. He was about to remind us why he's the head of a great family. William unleashed a massive shockwave of red energy, sending Kain flying backward with a pained cry. It was a brutal reminder of the power gap we were dealing with. William stood wreathed in a dark, terrifying aura. He asked if Kain was really going to abandon the family techniques just to prove his own will. Talk about a final boss vibe. Kain and I weren't done yet. I shouted for him to accelerate again, and we both prepared to dive back into the storm. Kain reached out, his eyes glowing blue with determination. He replied with a, "Right, ready to trust my strategy until the very end." Kain doubled down on his speed with wind magic, accelerate, the air around him whipping into a frenzy as he prepared his next move. Kain and I split up in a flash, leaping away from William like a pair of synchronized acrobats. We were leaving light trails in our wake, trying to find a better angle for our next move. William just stood there, looking as stoic as ever. He had that, "I've seen this 1,000 times" look on his face, totally unimpressed by our fancy footwork. We launched a coordinated aerial strike, coming at William from both sides at once. Kain's daggers were spinning in a whirlwind of green energy, looking for any gap in his father's guard. William's eye flashed with a lethal red glow as he tracked our movements. He wasn't just watching us, he was analyzing every tiny flaw in our technique as we closed in. Kain went in for the kill, but William caught the strike with a hand wreathed in dark red energy. He looked Kain right in the eye and cold-heartedly asked if that was all. Talk about a brutal ego check. A massive ripple of sound echoed through the air as William's energy-coated hand gripped Kain's blade. The sheer pressure was enough to make the air vibrate, showing the massive gap in our raw power. William forced Kain back, his dark aura reaching out like tendrils of smoke. Kain was struggling just to keep a grip on his weapon as the physical pressure mounted. William gritted his teeth in pure disgust, bellowing "coward" at his own son. He clearly thought Kain trying to retreat was a sign of weakness rather than a tactical move. William wasn't giving him an inch, charging toward a retreating Kain with a terrifying red aura flaring behind him. He was moving like a freight train, and he looked ready to end the spar right now. I stepped in with some mental backup, telling Kain that retreating isn't weakness. His eyes went wide as he realized the plan. He was setting up a pulled-back fist to land a much heavier blow. Kain stomped his foot down, green wind magic erupting around his boot with a heavy rumbling sound. He was anchoring himself, preparing to turn all that retreating momentum into an explosive counter. Little did William know what was coming next. Kain slid back across the dirt, his body glowing with wind energy as he baited his father in. This whole cowardly retreat was just a setup to connect to our real ultimate attack. Kain unleashed a massive wind magic tornado, turning the entire training field into a swirling mess of green energy. It was a high-level spell for a kid his age. The two of us dashed through the tornado, using the wind to mask our approach. We were moving with incredible speed, closing the distance on William in an instant. William gritted his teeth, his face illuminated by the magical winds. He was actually forced to go on the defensive against us. We both let out a battle cry as we launched our final combined strike. It was all or nothing right here. I explained a baseball technique called a changeup. Kain looked totally confused by the terminology, but he was ready to follow my lead. I swung my blade, yelling for him to take this as I used a deceptive speed variation to throw off William's timing. My knowledge from my past life is such a cheat code. I put all my weight into the swing, my eyes glowing with that intense blue light. I wasn't pulling any punches here. Kain followed up with a rapid-fire dagger strike, his weapon clashing against William's defense with a sharp clang. The impact created a massive shower of sparks. We were actually holding our own against a Grand Master, which is absolute insanity. I explained in my mind that the technique deceives opponents by using variations in speed. It turns even casual movements into effective feints that are almost impossible to read. I grinned, knowing that if the opponent's reaction is delayed even for a moment, in a high-level fight, that's all the opening you need. Kain moved like a ghost, leaving wind trails as he overwhelmed William's guard by maximizing his strengths. He was finally fighting on his own terms. William watched us, his expression becoming more complex. He was starting to see the new possibility that I was talking about. Kain dove in for another strike, looking more like a professional assassin than a noble heir. He's really embraced this new style. William thought to himself that such a slow attack has no meaning, preparing to counter with ease. He was still underestimating the change-up effect. I saw the realization in William's eye as he noticed the speed of the attack shifting mid-flight. The realization hit him just a second too late. With a loud clash, the three of us collided in a massive impact. Kain and I had managed to get past his initial guard. I performed a mid-air somersault over William, clearing the distance with zero effort. I was like a gymnast with a sword. We roared in unison as we poured every last bit of our energy into one final desperate thrust, and that's when everything changed. A massive X-shaped shockwave erupted as our blades connected. It was a direct hit that lit up the entire forest clearing. Suddenly, everything stopped. William caught both our weapons and calmly said, "That's enough." The authority in his voice was absolute. Kain and I froze in place, our breathing heavy as we stared at the man who just stopped our best move with zero effort. William stood there, arms crossed and cape flowing, looking every bit the legend he is. He's the peak of strength in this world. Kain looked up at his father, sweat dripping down his face. He was terrified, but also hopeful, waiting to hear if he finally made the grade. William told him not to disgrace the Oranka family name. It was a harsh way to say it, but for a man like William, that was basically a high five. Kain let out a huge, relieved, "Yes, father," while feathers drifted around them in the wind. He'd finally gotten the acknowledgement he's been dying for. William started walking away with his butler following closely behind. He was already done with the emotional stuff and back to being a stoic lord. William reflected on the fight, thinking about the consecutive strikes at close range and the hidden-away tactics we used. He was actually analyzing a fight with two kids. He called the possibility of retreating interesting, realizing it was a layer of combat he hadn't considered. I had officially taught a grandmaster something new. William mused to himself, to think I'd learned from children. He was finally admitting that I was a complete monster when it comes to combat theory. I let out a long sigh, catching my breath as the adrenaline wore off. I was just happy the spar was over without anyone actually dying. Kain was absolutely over the moon, grabbing me by the shoulder and shouting that he feels recognized for the first time in his entire life. He was so hyped he wanted to give me a present right now. We entered the massive Oranka family library. It had towering bookshelves that went up for stories. It was a literal dream come true for a scholar like me. I was totally floored, shouting about so many books with stars in my eyes. I was more excited about this than I was about the fight. Kain handed me a heavy box, saying it was a thank you gift. He admitted that without me, he never would have found his own path so quickly. I looked a bit stunned, my face going blank for a second. I wasn't expecting this much gratitude from a noble, but fate had other plans. I opened the box and my jaw dropped. It was filled with gold coins and rare items. I shouted in shock, wondering about something so valuable, my commoner soul crying out in shock. Kain explained that these weren't just books about the academy, but also seeker books about magic that commoners almost never get to see. He was basically giving me a huge head start. I flipped through the books, seeing titles like Basic Magic Theory and Mana Attribute Theory. I realized that new students are divided into magic and martial arts tracks, and everyone has to go through an awakening ritual. I asked about the ritual, and Kain explained that it's where you finally sense the elements through the statue of Gaia. He noted that he did his at the church temple, but even for great family members, it costs a staggering 10 gold coins. That's an insane amount of money for a normal person. I did the math and realized 100 gold coins is enough to cover the orphanage's living expenses for years. I asked nervously if I would have to pay that at the academy too. Kain reassured me that it's completely free once you're admitted to the academy. That was a huge relief for me and another reason why getting in was so important. I saw a vision of the academy surrounded by floating gold coins. The perks of being a top-tier student are seriously next level. Kain brought up the promise we made during the exam. He wanted to make sure I accepted the gift without any hesitation. He added with a smile that I should rely on him whenever I'm in trouble. I thought to myself that since magic pharmacists earn so much, I should look for related books in the library. I was already planning out my future business empire. Suddenly, a light bulb went off. I realized that if I invented things using knowledge from my previous life, I could make money quickly. I was about to revolutionize the whole world's economy. I got a serious look and asked Kain if the Oranka family had any connections with merchant guilds. Kain was totally caught off guard by the sudden business question. I gave him a wink and put a finger to my lips. I said it's a secret and that he'd find out eventually. I was officially the most dangerous person in the room. What a legend. 1 week later, it was finally time for the Candria Arcanist Academy entrance ceremony. The grand hall was buzzing with new students who managed to survive the brutal exams. I walked into the courtyard looking sharp in my new school uniform. I was already giving off major main character energy without even trying. Suddenly, a girl with pink hair named Rose got way too close and started sniffing me. She noted a trendy new cologne, which was a pretty weird way to say hello to a freshman. Rose realized that based on the price of that scent, my parents must have some deep pockets. She was already trying to gauge my social status based on how I smelled. Rose led the way, though she admitted she's never heard of the name Kirill before. She assumed I might be some noble's illegitimate kid, which is a pretty bold thing to say out loud to someone you just met. As we walked through the massive halls, Rose dropped some world lore. She mentioned that for the past 2 years, things have been getting tense since the Emperor started getting old. Because of the power vacuum, the imperial heirs have been fighting with the nobles and great families right here at the academy. It's not just a school, it's a high-stakes political battlefield. She credited Principal Aronian for keeping the peace on the surface, but underneath, things were far from calm. The academy was a powder keg just waiting for a spark. Rose explained the brutal reality here. Regular students move up if they pass classes and earn credits, but if you get targeted and crash, you're expelled. No second chances. She pointed a finger right at me, telling me I was officially one of the ones everyone will be watching. I basically had a target on my back from day one. Rose got all up in my personal space, giving me a fair warning that I was already a target of interest for the student body. She started prying into my background, casually asking about which side my family supports in the brewing political mess. She leaned in even closer, practically whispering in my ear to ask who my family backs. I was clearly feeling the heat, sweating as I tried to figure out how to handle this intense interrogation. And this decision would change everything. Suddenly, a hand reached into the frame, cutting off Rose's questioning. A new student with spiky blonde hair approached us, recognizing me as the commoner freshman everyone was talking about. Meet Brian, who seemed way more chill than the other nobles I'd met so far. He extended a hand to me, congratulating me on smashing the entrance exam records while the crowd in the background continued to gossip about my lowborn status. Rose looked totally flustered by the interruption, still babbling about the expensive scent she smelled on me earlier. She clearly lost the lead in this conversation and didn't know how to regain her footing now that Brian had stepped in. Deciding I wasn't worth her effort anymore, Rose stomped away in a huff, complaining that the whole encounter was a massive waste of time. I just ignored the drama and stayed polite, telling Brian it was nice to meet him as we officially kicked off our new alliance. I spotted a familiar face and gave a small wave. I said it's nice to meet him, always the polite guy even in a den of vipers like this academy. I was talking to Brian, a guy with short blonde hair who looked surprisingly friendly compared to the others. He told me not to mind Rose's attitude too much. Brian gave a firm handshake, warning me that the academy is essentially a miniature version of the Empire. As a commoner, I was definitely going to have it rough. Just then, Kain came running up shouting for me. It looked like the bromance was still going strong even after all the family drama at the mansion. Brian waved us off, saying he'll go say hi to the other new students. He told me to call him if I ever need anything. Looked like I just made a valuable ally. I watched Brian go, thinking in silence. I was already analyzing every person I met to figure out who I could really trust. Brian walked away, blending into the crowd of students. He seemed like a decent guy, but in a school like this, you can never be too sure about anyone's motives. Kain caught up and immediately asked what I was talking about with Brian. He was curious if I already knew the Chancellor's son. Kain explained that Brian is the Chancellor's son, but they aren't close or anything. He had that classic noble rivalry vibe going on when he talked about him. Kain admitted that Brian is a decent guy at least, especially compared to some of the other pampered snobs we'd met. But then Kain added that he doesn't like weak-willed guys like Brian. Just as he said it, Faye and Miliana showed up, and Faye was clearly offended by that comment. Faye yelled that his weak-willed comment was basically an indirect jab at her too. Miliana just waved a friendly, "Hey there," while the other two started their usual bickering, but things were about to get worse. I thanked Faye again for her help back during the exam. Faye brushed it off, saying I passed on my own strength and there was no need to thank her. Faye clenched her fist, a fire in her eyes as she declared that next time she'll be the one who wins. She was definitely not over that loss in the forest. Kain started mocking her, calling her a weakling, which just set her off even more. These two were basically the bickering couple of the group already. Miliana grabbed Faye and started dragging her away, saying they needed to go finish registration. She was definitely the voice of reason keeping the team on schedule. Once we were alone, Kain handed me a heavy bag of gold coins. He said this was my share, and man, that was a life-changing amount of cash for a commoner. I saw a view of the Burna Village Trading Company. It turned out my secret project from my previous life was already paying off big time. I revealed my secret product, perfume. I came up with a new type with a subtle scent that set it apart from the usual trashy ones everyone else uses. Kain gave it a sniff, admitting it smelled nice, but wondering if it'll really make money. I just gave him a confident response that he'll see once he tries selling it. Kain was amazed that we got such a high price for a simple scent. He was already planning to give some to his mom while I just thought about my next big idea. We walked through the reception hall, agreeing to keep our business venture a complete secret. Kain was already happy with the easy profits he was making. A faculty member handed me my official school credit card. He told me to work hard and become a master as soon as possible to live up to my potential. Other students were whispering in the background, calling me shameless for getting in. They'd heard the rumors about the principal expelling Sheath for me and they were not fans. Kain explained that Sheath got expelled on the spot once they found out he hired the Assassin Guild. It seems the academy actually has some standards when it comes to murder. I remained silent, realizing that my hunch about the attack in the woods was right. It was a targeted hit from a sore, noble loser. Kain warned me that Sheath has an older brother named Jess who is still at the school. He told me to stick close because there's no telling what he'll do for revenge. Speaking of the devil, Jess was watching us from the shadows with a glare that could kill. He was clearly not going to let his brother's expulsion slide without a fight. Little did they know what was coming next. Jess gave a sinister smirk, muttering that the fun is just beginning. This guy looked way more dangerous and calculated than his younger brother ever was. The scene shifted to the grand hall for the official ceremony. Principal Smith stood before the crowd, welcoming the new students to the Candria Arcanist Academy. Smith told the students to be proud of making it here through so many hardships. He was giving the classic elite speech to get everyone pumped up for the semester. He encouraged them to keep studying hard and aim to become truly powerful pillars of the empire. The freshman class listened with a mix of excitement and nerves. Smith introduced the next speaker, the freshman representative, Neil Gunn. The atmosphere in the room changed instantly as the top scorer was called up. A pair of bare feet climbed the stairs to the stage with a heavy sound. This guy doesn't even bother with boots for his own inauguration speech. Neil Gunn stood on stage, shirtless and holding his massive hammer over his shoulder. This guy looked like he just walked out of a gladiator pit instead of an orientation. The noble students were completely horrified, whispering about the savage commoner who took first place. The killing intent he was radiating was so intense it was practically vibrating the air. The proctors were panicking, calling him an idiot while Principal Smith just watched with an amused look. He was the only one enjoying this total lack of decorum. Neil slammed his hammer down, shouting for all the morons to listen up. He was definitely not interested in making any friends here today. He declared his one and only goal, to beat every last one of them until they wet themselves. Talk about the worst orientation speech in school history. The students were outraged, flipping him off and screaming that getting first place doesn't mean he can act like a beast. Neil just stared back with zero chill. Neil screamed at them to shut it and called them all weaklings who only know how to talk big. He was essentially challenging the entire freshman class at once. One student was actually clutching his stomach, saying he felt like quitting already. Smith just stood behind the problem child, looking totally unbothered by the chaos. Neil pointed his massive weapon directly at someone in the crowd and yelled that his main target was them. He had his sights locked in on someone specific. With a massive swing, he hurled his giant hammer into the air. The heavy metal head spun toward the audience with a rushing sound, and that's when everything changed. The hammer smashed into the floor right in front of me with a bone-shattering impact. Neil wasn't just talking trash, he was taking immediate action. The weapon buried itself deep in the marble floor, smoke curling off the metal. This was a direct declaration of war against me. Kain and I stood right in front of the hammer, looking totally unfazed. I just sighed, realizing that a quiet school life was officially off the table. I stared up at Neil with a cold, focused expression. I wasn't intimidated by the giant or his hammer, which was exactly why I was the main target. Neil landed on the very top of his hammer's handle, balancing on his bare feet. He was looking down at me with a predatory, excited grin. Neil started to speak, towering over the crowd from his perch. He had essentially turned the orientation ceremony into his own personal fighting arena. He roared that we were gonna fight, his eyes glowing with an insane competitive fire. I just glared back, ready for whatever this red-haired monster threw at me.